Welcome to the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast, the untold stories of the Kundalini Yoga 3HO community. I am your host, Guru Nishan. I want to thank you for joining us for another episode today. And I'd also like to invite you, if you'd like to support this broadcast, you can make a one-time or monthly donation at gurunishan.com/uncomfortable conversations. I was born and raised in this community. I love the people of our community, and I wrote several intentions for why I started this podcast. Number one, to break the veil of silence that has long permeated and continues to strangle the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community in the name of neutrality. Number two, to validate and help clarify the complex feelings of those who joined this lifestyle, were born and raised into it, and or who have practiced or taught Kundalini Yoga. Number three, to encourage active listening to uncomfortable conversations from our community as a revolutionary act of self and collective healing. Number four, to let survivors know that we see them, we believe them, we love them, and we will fight for their truth to be addressed. Number five, to let teachers who are denying, gaslighting, or spiritually bypassing know that what they are doing is willfully ignorant and re-traumatizing victims. Number six, to illuminate the inherent racism, homophobia, cultural misappropriation, and exploitation that perpetuates the teachings, 3HO lifestyle, and overall community ethos. Number seven, to stop the perpetuation of gaslighting and victim shaming by naming it for what it is. Number eight, to dismantle internalized shame, guilt, and toxic positivity, as well as light washing mentality. Number nine, to honor all of the parts of ourselves that have been forgotten or silenced. Number 10, to honor each body that has come through our community, both named and unnamed. Number 11, to encourage people to do their own research, process their own emotions, get somatic therapy and other support as needed, draw your own conclusions, and be critical thinkers rather than just blindly follow anyone. Please remember that your story matters. Please share it when you're ready. We're here to listen and to support you. I want to welcome our guest for today, who is SatHanuman Singh Khalsa. He started practicing Kundalini Yoga in 1972. He was one of the 13 original members of the Baba Siri Chand Ashram, founded by Yogi John Twombly and wife Soorya Kaur in Florida, Orlando, Florida. He started teaching Kundalini Yoga in 1972 and continued until 2007 after relocating to Portland, Oregon, in which he continued his interfaith work and lecturing at schools from Florida, New England, and Portland about Sikhi. His daughters are Pavan and Siri Kaur, both married to sons of our community. He worked at the Golden Temple Conscious Cookery in Washington, D.C. and Boston for 5 years and was the top salesman at Golden Temple Emporium, or GT Emporium, in Cambridge, Massachusetts from 1976 until 1980. He went on to start the Community Business Brokers in 1986 and Siri Guru Nanak Inc., which is CBB/CGN, both built, and he built both the Southeast and Northeast regions in 1986 until 2002. SGN, for those listeners that don't know, fell under KIIT, which stands for Khalsa Industries and Trade Umbrella, which basically is the holding entity of all the Khalsa businesses: Akal, Yogi Tea, Golden Temple Bakery, Sunshine Oils, 3HO Health, Sun & Sun, KRI, etc. He's trained police and FBI about the Sikh path and is the first Sikh with turban and full beard to be hired by TSA DHS. He's now semi-retired, working at the Presence Market as the Presence Marketing Retail Services for Whole Foods in Oregon for the past 8 years. Well, Satnam, I want to say what a mouthful. And I know that barely scratches the surface on your experience, but I just want to say thank you for being here, SatHanuman.
Thank you for having me.
Please tell us why you feel it's important to share your story right now.
Well, considering it's been almost 50 years since it's been over 50 years since I first was aware of this lifestyle and this path. A lot has gone on in the last 5 decades. And I hear and I've listened to many of the stories that both you have interviewed, recorded, and others, the second generation of 3HO, and I've listened to along the way. I became aware of a lot of other things that were going on at different parts of my journey along the path. I confronted them when I could, racism for one thing, homophobia another. The the issues that have come up, other than what went on with a lot of the youth in the first generation, and maybe even the second generation, and maybe even the third generation, in the school in India and that. I thought that what needs to be added to this discussion is the business part of it. How this teacher we had ran his businesses. I heard you in your interviews with a couple of people that are peers of mine from the first generation, and how I listened to the comments that were brought up in both those interviews that had to do with the businesses when it came to buying a building for an ashram or sending our children to school in India back in the 80s and then beyond. So that made me think my story is an important one. And I believe there are other people like myself that have been involved intimately with businesses that were created by YB. That's how I'm going to refer to our teacher. And that's pretty much it. We'll go from there.
I wanted to say thank you for all that. It's really important to bring this lens of the business and the historical nature of the runnings of it. So thank you for being here. I also know you have a lot of details and a long history of different elements, so I really want to allow you to get right into it. But before we do, knowing that you are practicing Sikhi, teach it, your daughters are practicing, in the community, and I just want to context that for listeners and just say wow, before we even get into the history, what was it like for you to since Premka's book came out in 2020 and then all the stories came, was that the first break open of you cutting your distance from Yogi Bhajan, or has it been a long kind of slow pull away?
I think that major was the break. That was the break that I put. You put your foot on the pedal and you break. I have to admit, I did not read Pamela's book. I knew her as Premka. I was many times I engaged with her from the 70s into the 80s and until she left. But that book didn't really open me up. It was listening to the second generation, listening to other people who had been affected by things that are totally incongruous to what was taught by this teacher. I also spoke to one of his staff of 17 years, a woman who I worked with when I worked at CBB SGN, and she confirmed things about many of the things that came out over the last, say, 10 or 11 months, more so. I was aware, as many other people, of things that you hear along the way when it came to YB's, stuff. And I rationalized those things like many of us did. A man has issues, there's you forgive for that kind of thing and say, well, there's so much good that this person is doing. He has his shortcomings, we'll forgive him. But there's been so much more that has come out. And that really, the brakes just were put on right around February, March. I remember it was just about the time that we were aware of the COVID thing, but we weren't social distancing yet. We weren't really taking it as seriously. We were aware that it was here. And I had been working, I've been an activist pretty much my whole adult life, even into my early years. And so I was working with a person who was running for the presidency, Marianne Williamson. And of course, no one really took her serious, but I did. And so she came to Portland, and I don't know the exact date, but I think it was right on the 1st of March. And it was on the way there that my wife got a call from my oldest daughter. And I didn't know at the time it was my oldest daughter, who is Pavan car. We parked in the parking lot of this Unitarian church, and I left her alone to have a conversation. I went into the church to save us a seat. And it was a great night. We got to have a nice time with Marianne and talk with her and stuff. But a day later, that was on a Tuesday night, I think it was on Wednesday or even Thursday, my wife said to me, we're going to Eugene on Saturday, and you need to listen, you need to speak to your daughter. Now, that really kind of sparked my attention. Like, my intuition just went, red flag. What does that mean? And I have to tell you that prior to all this, right up until that moment, I was one of YB's biggest defenders. I didn't call him YB. I called him the Siri Singh Sahib. I was writing things on Facebook. I was right up there, totally supporting it. And then when this thing hit me, and I had to go down and spend several hours listening to my eldest daughter share her story, which I'm not going to go into. But that really made me think, this is bigger than I even knew. And nobody, friends of mine, I've had over the years, you accumulate friends and family along the way. I lived in one of these ashrams for many years. The last one being the Millis ashram, where I lived for 10 years with my wife. And so you get to know, I have friends in Virginia and Herndon. I have friends in, all over the place. And I, you would check out to see, okay, how are you on this? Or people would call me, how are you on this? And I was very honest and upfront, and I said, I'm no longer this way. And I could see that other people that I trusted also were on the same page. And then other people who I thought I trusted were like you said, gaslighting, neutral, or defending to the point of, it was not comfortable to hear what they were doing. Not just, it wasn't me I was concerned, it was other people that they were going after, and they still are, I think. So that got me really, but then, Guru Nishan, I started to think about my story. How does this apply to me, other than being the father of two beautiful daughters? How does that apply to me? And that's why I started to formulate this. I think listening to you, a friend of mine who used to live in Texas, now lives here in Portland, she had said, this is worth checking out. And we've all been on these calls, various calls over the last several months. And when she recommended it, that's when I went on YouTube and I started listening to some of your interviews. I know Narindian, I know her parents in Vancouver. I know
Rose, Ted.
Rose,
and Ron, probably. Well, thank you for that. I just wanted to give a little context, like in present day, and I'd really like to give you the platform to take it where you want us to go. Obviously, giving us some historical context more than your bio helps, and then getting into the financial corruption and the history of understanding that, I think, is a really excellent area to address. So thank you.
Well, if you see me going off on a tangent, you'll guide me back.
You're right.
I'm a storyteller, so just have to bear with that. So I have to go back to, even before I told you, I have to go back when I was a real youth. Let's say I was just barely a teenager, and I was a Christian practicing in a denomination, which I was very active in since I was like probably 5 years old, all the way up through my teenage years. But I've often told people, say, you know, how long is your hair, and when did you stop letting your beard grow, and all that. It was because of that particular upbringing that each time I would sit in a pew in a church and I would see a picture on the wall of Christ, I questioned in my head, why has he got long hair? Why does he have a beard? And everybody else is clean shaven and nobody does that. You know, and I did a lot of research on the times that he lived in. And I thought, the Romans were the ones who shaved. They were the clean cut society. They ruled everywhere, but he wasn't. And so I started to take it from there. Now I'm going to jump into like, okay, 1968, everything that was going on in 1968 affected me. I was a senior in high school. I had seen things. I moved from New England to Florida in 1966. My parents separated. My mother took the four of us. I have 3 siblings. We went to Florida. I was exposed to things you'd only read about in books. Around me, it was the Ku Klux Klan. It was all that stuff. So I was an athlete. I was an athlete when I lived in New England. I played ice hockey. I was really good at it, but there was no hockey in Florida. So I had to go back to what do I do now as an athlete? So I ran cross country and track, long distances, and I was in really good shape. But I did join the service in 1968 because I wasn't secure in myself what I wanted to do. And even though I could have gone to college on a scholarship, etc., I thought I'm not ready for that. So I went to service. I'm in the service a little over a year, and I meet a rabbi from New York, Columbia University. We have long discussions about prejudice and racism and stuff like that. And I realized that he just opened my eyes to a lot of things. But I was still in the military, and the Vietnam War was going on. And I had just been promoted as sergeant, which means I'm probably going to go to Vietnam, because once they train you and they get all that, I started to read Mahatma Gandhi's autobiography. That led me to India. That led me to meditation. That led me to yoga. I met Gandhi's grandson here in Portland, and I told him, I said, you see the way I look now? That's your grandfather's doing. He did that. And he kind of looked at me like, what? See, what does that got to do with my grandfather? Anyway, I had a lot of duality, and here I was serving in the military, and I asked a lawyer at the judge advocate's office if he could help, and he said, I know you pretty well. I've known you now for a year, and have you ever thought of being a conscience objector? And I went, I thought you had to do that before you went in. He said, and I'm not a Seventh-day Adventist. I'm not a Jehovah's Witness. He said, no, I think if we go back and go right up and go back to your childhood up, if we can show consistency, we can get the Air Force to give you an honorable discharge. So that took another year. I did get discharged. And when I got out, I made up my mind I was going to be an activist. So I did a lot of anti-war organizing, a lot of things like that. Very much like, when you interviewed Tej, I was very active in that. I went to DC in 1971 and hitchhiked down from New Hampshire and was arrested. And I'm proud of that. I was arrested in a nonviolent protest. And, but then I ended up, my mother was in the hospital in Florida, and I hitchhiked from New Hampshire down to Florida. And I'm still like, what am I going to do now? My sister, who's also a Sikh, Golden Temple Conscious Cookery, she lives in Espanola. I told her, she came to me and she said, you've been to a couple pop festivals, by the way, where I first met YB or saw YB. Didn't meet him, but I first saw him in 1970 in Atlanta when I was in the military. In 1971, she begged me to take her to New Orleans to a place, a pop festival called the Celebration of Life. It was everything but that. But YB was there, and I got to be in his presence. I didn't know who he was. was just a long, tall guy with a beard, dark beard, and turban on and everything. Didn't know what any of it was, but I felt like, he's really, what he was saying made sense to me. So I go back. I was a passenger in a car, as was my sister. I had an accident. I have a scar over my right eye. It took off my right eyebrow and the top of my head. And I was in the hospital for 5 days, and they wrapped me in bandages. So I almost looked like I was wearing a turban. Went back to home, and all my plans of trying to find some spiritual journey kind of went to the back burner. And I saw a poster that said Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan. I said, I saw that guy. I've seen him twice. I want to check this out. You know, there were a lot of things going on back in that period of the early 70s. There was the Hare Krishna movement, the Transcendental Meditation movement had been going on since the 60s. There was Swami SatHanuman, Yogananda, all these things, the Sufi movement, everything. And so I still wasn't, I did go to the classes. I actually hitchhiked on a Saturday evening, 12 miles away. I hitchhiked to my first Kundalini Yoga class. And I felt incredible, but that was in August of 71. Now, go forward, November of 71, I'm taking a world religion class, and I'm learning about Sikhi. I'm learning all about this. Now, it's very unique, because I would later take other courses, including at Harvard Divinity School, and it was always comparing Christianity to all the religions. It wasn't really giving each religion its autonomy and, to see what is the truth here, what's the universal truth here. And but this particular religion class was like that, and it was amazing. So I first heard about Guru Nanak and the Golden Temple and this in a class that I was taking at this college. And then in November, my professor made an announcement at a morning class. A yogi is coming to our school, and he's going to give a lecture this afternoon at 3. You're all invited. It's no charge. Now, I'm doing Kundalini Yoga, and I'm hearing about this mystical thing out there called Yogi Bhajan, but I'm not really. And he comes to my college. Wow. So here you are thinking to yourself, when the student's ready, the teacher comes, right?
Right.
You got that going into your program, right? A woman on campus who knew I was a vegetarian, I had become a vegetarian over those months and stuff. She asked me, would you like to come and meet the yogi? He wasn't called anything but the yogi or yogi.
That's why in Remke's book, she kept referring to him as the yogi.
Yeah, that's what everybody called him. You want to meet the yogi personally. So I was invited to have dinner with the yogi after he gave that lecture. Not much interact. I did ask him a question, which he kind of pushed away with a little bit of admonishment, which I was kind of intrigued by. I remember my reference point was Mahatma Gandhi. Mohandas K. Gandhi was my reference point. I thought I knew a lot about him. And I asked him a question about Gandhi, and he said, Gandhi was more trouble than he was worth. And I went, what's that all about? But he had some kind of energy about him that there's got to be something that this guy knows that I don't know.
Interesting.
So I went to his class that night. And it was at that class, after I did the class with him, that an incident happened after the class where he zeroed in on a man and a woman whose children were running around, 2 children, a boy and a girl, and a woman next to him was crying in the arms of other people that were there. Premka might have been there. Soorya was definitely there. Some other people that was comforting this woman. I won't say what her name is or the children, but the children were, he tried to convince this guy, YB did, to leave his affair with this woman because these were his 2 children and he needs to be responsible as a father and go back to his wife. Well, the guy never did. And that woman would then go to, I would end up, that was in, like I said, that was in November of 71. Now, I had never been to the ashram, which was 60 miles away in Orlando, Florida. I'd only been doing my weekly class. Not many guys at the age of 21 are going to a yoga class. every week religiously, and doing sadhana. I started doing sadhana. I started getting up at 3 a.m., taking a cold shower. Had a roommate that did Kundalini Yoga with me. He also did TM, but he was really into all this stuff, and he was an artist. And I was just into, this is it. This is the only one I can relate to. I really get off on this. And we used to call our yoga classes every Saturday night our pizza class, or a Mexican feast class, because it got you so hungry, almost like smoking pot, that you got so, that energy was going that you just wanted to go out and eat. So anyway, I wanted more. So I went to what they called an intensive at the ashram in April. It was actually April 1st. It was a weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. The rules were you're on silence. We're fasting for 2.5 days. We'll end the fast on Sunday. You're only allowed to say Satnam or Waheguru. And they didn't even say it that way. They said Waheguru and Satnam and all this. And nobody knew how to pronounce anything. But the classes that we did, the yoga that we did was so powerful. I mean, it was amazing. I really had a heart chakra opening experience, which I didn't know till later what it was. But I just knew I felt incredible. And then, okay, I won't tell you all that, but I moved on from there, and I said, I got to move in here. So I told my girlfriend over in Cocoa, do you want to go with me? She wasn't ready to do that, so I moved in. All right, so happened, I went to my first summer solstice sadhana in Mendocino County, same one that some of your folks you've interviewed have been to.
Yep.
Drove across the country. I first met Mukta Kaur, who was living in Tucson. I met her along with a bunch of people. It was an ashram that was full of women, because they all loved and thought SatHanuman Singh, this guy from Brooklyn with a beautiful voice, this very ethereal voice, was the person. One of them was going to marry him. He was single at the time. Well, we traveled, I traveled from Florida all the way to California. So along the way, we stopped at ashrams in various places. And that was the one we stayed the longest at. Went to Mendocino. Somebody tried to match me up with that woman whose husband left her and left those 2 kids. Tried to match me up, arrange a marriage for me. It was John and Soorya trying to do that with me. And I went, no, I'm not ready for that. We got back to Florida after all of that. It was gone like 2 weeks. We get to be around August. And when I say I was one of the founding 13 people, it was really only about 6 people, because there were 2 married couples, John and Soorya, and this other couple who would later be my oldest daughter's in-laws. And then there was myself. So that's 5. And there was a couple other people who moved in after me. And then after that, 2 women moved in. One of the married couple's sister, he had like 3 sisters that got into this. And one of them brought her friend in, and that woman, they were all about 18 years old. I was 22. And then what happens? Okay, now we get to September, and BBG, Yogi Bhajan's wife, arrives for the first time in the United States. She arrives in New York. I believe she landed at JFK. And people that you've already have been brought up in, well, one of them has been brought up at least in one of your interviews, Hari Harkar. I kept hearing that, and I said, oh yeah, I know who she is. And she was in DC, and so was Narinian Kaur, who lived in LA, and also, I don't know where she lives now, but she's pretty much involved in a lot of stuff. And the 2 of them were sent by probably YB to Larry Wentick, who was called Ledi Singh, and he was married to Gunga Bhajan Kaur, Gunga. And they
ran the DC ashram.
They ran the DC ashram, and pretty much he was in charge of the East Coast. Okay. He was the first kind of Mukhiya Singh Sahib overall, right? Kind of right-hand man to Yogi Bhajan. I think he had Waheguru Singh in the Southwest, and he had this guy, and there were other people, like the person who started the Phoenix ashram we called him Baba whatever, but he became
Baba Don.
Baba Don, correct. And then we had Baba Bert, who would become Sat Santok Singh in San Rafael. But I met all these people. I met Vikram Singh when he came over from England with his wife. I met him in Tucson, and everybody from Phoenix came down to Tucson, and we had this big chanting session when I was on my way out to New Mexico, out to California that time. But anyway, BBG is brought down for the YB sends her with the 3 kids. They're like 16, 14, and 12, or somewhere around that age group. Sends them to none other than Baba Siri Chand. I have just been given a nice guitar, and I'm learning how to play it. And I learned a song that related to Gandhi. Remember, Gandhi is my touchstone. Yeah. And that song was something that maybe the original Hanuman 20,000 years ago sang, Raghupate Raghaiva Raja Ram Patita Pavana Sita Ram. Anybody who saw the movie Gandhi, that's the final prayer in the movie as they're spreading his ashes over the Ganga. Well, BBG heard me singing that. And she said, oh, you know, Gandhiji loved that. Well, that made me feel even better. Well, then she must have had a talk with Soorya and John and said, this gentleman is very devoted. He's a very sweet man. Why don't we marry this guy, to this young lady over here? And they arranged my marriage. BBG and Soorya and John arranged my marriage. And I was like, so like trusting, because this must be what's supposed to happen. She did not want to marry me. She had her eyes on someone else, but she, you know, the women put pressure on her, you know, oh, he's such a wonderful guy. We were married on Thanksgiving Day in November, a year after I first had that dinner with Yogi Bhajan and went to his class. A year later, in November, on Thanksgiving Day, my mother attended the wedding. It was a small wedding. It wasn't a lavan. It wasn't your traditional like Sikh wedding. It was more like a hippie wedding.
Okay.
And BBG presided. She's the one who married us.
He married you. Wow.
Yeah, with John and Soorya, because you know they were Sardarni Saiba and Singh Sahib, because Yogi Bhajan had started making these ministers at 72, Mendocino, California. I watched them all become ministers.
At that solstice is when that whole ministerial thing started, all the titles.
Yep. That's when you started seeing more women with turbans on. You started hearing about, you know, you saw the Sikh Dharma flag first time. And yeah, but it was all happening very fast. I was open to it because I really loved what I learned about Sikhi, but I didn't know how this all worked and everything. So I got married.
I want to pause you real quick and say, you had mentioned to me that Hanuman was your name and then Yogi Bhajan changed that. So has that happened already? Or are you still coming to that?
No, I was, okay. In 1972, I was just Hanuman. John looked at me one day and heard me singing and said, you remind me of Hanuman, the monkey god. And he said, and you look like him. I went, really? and so he said, I'm going to name you Hanuman.
Got it.
And at first I didn't like it because I look like a monkey. Years later, I would learn so much more about Baba Hanuman and have much more of a respect for that, what that name means. But I had the name. Now, the reason why the name was changed to SatHanuman, besides it's confusing to everybody who ever learns it, that doesn't know yoga, doesn't know meditation, has never heard of Hanuman, they get tripped up with that TH sound. Okay, well, YB comes John Twombly, John Singh Twombly, as he called him back then. He left and went to India because he just wanted to go. He was a real yogi. He loved yoga. He was really good at it too. And he gave us all our names. He's the one that gave us our names. As I look back on now, I realize YB wanted to brand us himself. So he called many of us into the room in 1973, a year after, later, and said, okay, put Sat on the front of your name. And said that to my wife, my first wife. He said her name was Purusha, and he named her Sat Purusha. And then you started having my daughter being born in 1974, home birth, beautiful experience, I mean, beyond words. And she would be given the name Sat Pavan. Now you can see the connection with Hanuman if you remember that song, Patita Pavana Sitaram Pavan. Son of the wind is Hanuman. And then I have a daughter named Sat Pavan Kaur. All right, that's how he said it too. I didn't even understand it when he called me up from LA and he said, her name is Sat Pavan Kaur. And I went, sir, I don't know. He goes, Prana. I went, oh, okay, Pavan, okay. And then so that was that. So now we have that in. But so I started, everywhere I went, how do you say your name? Can I call you Sat? Can I call you this? Can I call you that? I'd say, just listen to me. Say Sat, yeah, and then say Honeyman. So say Sat Honeyman, and they go Sat Honeyman. I say, now say Sat Hanuman. But they always wanted to get a simple one-syllable word. I said, all right, from now on, you call me Singh. Okay, that's it. Just Singh. That's easy for you. You can pronounce Singh. So, I was trying to be work, but that's what happened with that whole thing with the name. And, and okay, then, so
she's born, Pavan's born, home birth. You're still in the ashram with the other couples.
Okay, yeah. So then what happens is, okay, half the ashram split when John left and went to India because they were attached to him. And a new teacher, a new director came down from Massachusetts or New England, and his name was Soorya Singh. And his newly wife married was Soorya Kaur. And they didn't have any children yet, but they would soon have 2 children that are still around somewhere that you may know, may not, may interview.
We're in the community still now.
Oh yeah. So we're in Florida, and Soorya and I, over the years, just did not see eye to eye on a lot of things. He was supposedly a minister, and I was just one of the guys that lived in the ashram. But we were there. We were trying to save that ashram because what do? We were originally in Pine Hills. We were on like about 15, 18 acres of land, but it was all owned by a guy who owned that land. And in 1973, he sold the property after winter solstice, gave us 1 month's notice, and we had to find somewhere where we could take like 25, 30 people and move somewhere. This probably happened all over the country, but it was happening to us. We found a nursing home that had not been used for years, and we rented it. It was weird because it was a place where they put people who had emotional issues. It was like the vibration was weird. It's almost like today you'd go in with a smudge and do all kinds of clearing and stuff. But we went in there, we did a Kanpat, and we tried to change the vibration. And we were only there temporarily, so we kept looking, where's that place that we're gonna finally settle in is Baba Siri Chand Ashram. And we found a place in Altamont Springs. It was on a dirt road. It was on an acre of land, and it was a house that was selling for $75,000. A mailman, a mail carrier, was retiring. He wanted to sell his house for $75,000. Well, we have to put 20% down. I had $5,500 in an account that was left over from my accident, and I said, I'll give $4,000 towards it. And somebody else got a loan from his father, and we got that $15,000 down payment, and we got that home. That home today is worth over $1 million. That home today is worth over $1 million, and somewhere in the archives of this organization, someone owns that property as Sikh Dharma. It's a teacher training center. It has beautiful lions on the front, just like in Espanola. In fact, those lions came from Soorya, and he brought them out from Florida. It's like years ago.
Can I stop you and get some clarity real quick? So when half the ashram left with Larry, why did that take place? So was there a split happening? Was things getting more organized? Like when was YB coming in and organizing? So it kind of went from a little less hippie and more to Sikhi. Some people were breaking.
Yeah, that was probably a lot to do with it. Is that where people were really getting high off Kundalini Yoga, but and they related to the yogic part of it, but they couldn't relate to this transition we were going through of Sikhi. And I had, fortunately for myself, my first wife and I, we were sent to a Himsa ashram where I lived for 6 months and worked at the Golden Temple Conscious Cookery.
Tell us where Himsa is. Tell us where that's at.
Washington, D.C.
Got it.
Yeah, it was one of the first 2, I think, vegetarian restaurants that were called Golden Temple. I think there were 12 of them between Canada and the U.S. The first one was in D.C. and in Boston. The Santa Fe one they had one. Eventually, L.A. was one of the last ones. And I worked in that place, and that was called teacher training. You went there and you worked from 5 o'clock in the morning until 11 o'clock at night. And then you cleaned up the place and made it really great so it would pass inspection. You went home and had 3 hours of sleep. took a cold shower, started all over again, did yoga, then went and chopped vegetables, and you were a waiter in the restaurant and all that stuff. But I did all those jobs, but I did them with people like Guru Ganesha and Mata Mundakar, who weren't married at the time, and Mata Mundar Singh, who was single before, and Rose, Diana, and a lot of other folks that we all shared that place. And that was probably the first time I was in an ashram where I felt like this is really cozy. This is really the way it is. Now, when I went back to Florida, and they sent me back because they knew the ashram was splitting up, and that Soorya called. See, she called and said, SatHanuman, she was crying, and she said, I need your help because everybody's leaving. And so Letty Singh, that's what he was called back then, he was responsible for the East Coast. So he said to me, will you go back to Florida and help keep this thing together? Helps this new teacher, this new director. I said, yeah, I'll do that. So that's why we went back to Florida, and then Pavan would be born in that ashram in 1974. But it's interesting because when she was 6 months old, Warren and I, like I said, butted heads a lot. And one day on a Friday after we did our morning sadhana, he said, come and see me after sadhana. I went after. He said, I'm putting you on a Greyhound bus tonight, and I'm sending you to Washington, D.C. to work at the Golden Temple Conscious Cookery again. And you will come back when I decide. Letty Singh and I have spoken. Letty Singh and I have spoken about it, and you will stay there. And I said, well, what about my daughter? She's only 6 months old, and my wife. And he goes, they'll stay here. We'll take care of them. But you're going to go up there. So I was put on a Greyhound bus at 11 o'clock at night on a Friday, gun in at midnight on a Saturday night at midnight, and was put in a house, got up, 3 hours sleep, got up, did sadhana, and right in front, right there on Q Street in Washington, D.C., big sadhana. Guru Ganesha saw me. He said, come up and play with me. And we were chanting and doing that. It was no Aquarian sadhana. It was something else,
Sure.
And so Letty Singh was sitting there next to Gurjot Singh, who you've already had brought up in one of your interviews. And this is an interesting thing. I'm sitting there, and Letty looks at me and he goes, what are you doing here, SatHanuman? Right? I was told by the director of the ashram in Altamont Springs
that he knew.
That he knew. Well, he was quick on his feet because he said, come into my office tomorrow. I want to talk to you. Go work at the Golden Temple restaurant. They made me the maitre d', and I worked at the restaurant. By then I was a pretty seasoned about this stuff. And he says, go do that. The next day, I know he had a chance to talk to Joe, because Letty Singh was out of town when all this happened. So really, Samporan had talked to Guru Joe.
Oh.
And you use Letty as the, like the Yogi Bhajan, the other guy, the big guy.
Right.
The big guy, yeah. So he says
at
to
this
me,
point, Letty Singh is running the East Coast, not Guru Joe Singh. He's just close in there. Okay, just double check.
Yeah, he had his, I think he was, had a marriage and left, and he was brought over from the Midwest, Michigan or someplace. And he was brought over to DC. But he was kind of a different kind of person. He wasn't as engaging. He was always like very, quiet and, it's kind of strange interaction with him. Never really much said with him. But Letty Singh was much more like, I need you to do me a favor. There's an ashram in Cleveland, Ohio, and I think you're ready to go and be the director and stuff, because the man who was directing it, his name is Saram Singh, and he's just graduated from Case Western Reserve Medical School, and the Siri Singh Sahib, or Yogi Ji or whatever, wants him to come to LA. That would be Saram Singh, who was living in Shaker Heights, which is a pretty nice area of Cleveland, right? It's like Beverly Hills in LA or something. Mm-hmm. So I get put on a bus with my first wife and our 6 month. They sent her up from Florida finally. After a month of being at the Golden Temple in DC, they brought her up, they flew her up to DC, and the two of us were on a bus and our 6-month-old Pavan car, and we were sent to Cleveland. And Kulwant Kar and Saram were sent to LA. And I had no money. What do I have? I've been working at these restaurants with tips and nothing, room and board's taken care of. It's almost like being in the military. You don't get paid much, but you're covered, right? And no one really thought about it, but you're, think about it. People think it's weird, and it is weird. But he puts me on a bus in Florida because he doesn't want me around, sends me up there. And now this guy is going to do something he didn't count on, the guy in Florida. You're now going to be the director of an ashram in Cleveland, Ohio. So I have to find a place to live because what's his name's lease in Shaker Heights is gone. So I'm out again. What do? So I get a job at a natural health food store as the assistant manager. Guy smoked a lot of pot. So he would go for like an hour and a half lunch break because he's smoking pot, and I'd be taking care of everything in the store. I was 25 years old. So Pavan, and so we're there. We were there until winter solstice. Now we drive a drive-away car from Cleveland, a Cadillac, an Eldorado convertible, down from I-75, down from Cleveland to where it was held, which was in DeLeon Springs and north of Altamont Springs, where the winter solstice was.
In Florida.
In Florida. So I take one of my students.
What year is this?
1975.
Okay.
So I've been in Cleveland from May until December, and now I'm down in Florida again. Something happened at that particular solstice that was interesting. There was the director of the Albuquerque ashram, or the guy who ran that ashram. He's no longer around. His name was Bahadur Singh, not to be confused with the wonderful Bahadur Singh who lives in Texas, who is a friend of mine, a lovely man. But this guy. And we go to solstice, and remember, this is outside winter solstice. There's a stage that's sort of been put together with, palms and everything over the top, and everybody's sitting in line on their sheepskins, and I'm asked to come up on stage by none other than Diana Rose, Bhagwankar,
really?
who knew me from the Golden Temple, right, in DC. So she said, "SatHanuman, join me and let's set the vibration, chant to Guru Ram Das." Right. So we're up there. This guy Bahadur, he says, "I don't want any announcements made except through me." Okay, no problem. You're the stage manager. YB is somewhere else. He hasn't arrived yet. There's always that anticipation when he shows up. So I'm chanting to Guru Ram Das, and the people setting up for the tantra lines say, "SatHanuman, will you ask everybody to sit up straight so we can get these lines?" And I said, "Folks, sit up straight." Oh my God. That was it. So when the tantra was over and YB left and went back to his cabin, and everybody went down to what they call the longhouse or whatever, they went down to have their evening dinner for the solstice meal. Bahadur walked up to me and he said, "I thought I told you not to say anything." I said, I was asked to tell people to sit up straight. And he basically took my head off, and I wouldn't stand for it. I just wouldn't stand for it. I said, "You know something?" And people heard this. In fact, some Purin heard it. Remember, the guy that originally sent me.
And he the one running the ashram in Florida.
He heard me say to a lot of people heard this. I said, "Bahadur, you're full of shit." And we're at solstice. We're in this thing where everybody's like, holy and stuff.
High vibration.
And I just said, that's bullshit. And so then what happens is they call I wouldn't call it a tribunal. It was more than that. There was the director of the ashram in Hartford, Connecticut, the director of the ashram in Massachusetts, in Montague, which was Steve Joseph's, was called Guru Singh. He's known for writing the Guru Ram Das lullaby and all that stuff, the Long Tall Yogi song and all that stuff from that period. And so then I got Livtar Singh would be, so they brought Gurjot Singh and Gurtej Singh. All of these guys were either Mukhi Singh Sahibs or Singh Sahibs. And there was like 8 or 9 of them. And I'm on the hot plate.
Wow. "You're
a minister." I said, "I'm not a minister." Because I had been the director, so therefore I must be a minister, right? That's how their minds worked. And I said, "I'm not a minister." And they said, "Your behavior the other night by saying this to another minister," I said, "What did I say?" I called him out on his stuff. It went around. It lasted at least an hour. And finally, one of the people, by the way, Gurtej, I have to tell you publicly, he was very compassionate. Always thought he was a really compassionate person. But I remember Gurshubed, Steve Joseph, saying, "SatHanuman Singh, all you have to do is admit that you're wrong and you'll be right."
Oh my God.
Which to me meant just be secure with yourself, be humble. You're okay. You're okay. Don't worry about it. So I said, all right, I'm wrong. I was wrong for doing what I said, saying what I said, and the way I said it. I was not. And it ended right there. It ended. All right. So now my wife stays in Florida with Pavan. And by the way, she's pregnant with our second child.
Okay.
All right. And they stay in Florida because my mom and her mom lived in Orlando. So they could see each other. And I went back to the ashram. We had just bought a house, a nice, beautiful home. I had the GI Bill, I had the VA, VA loan, and I was all ready to have this house so we could move in Cleveland, Ohio, of all places, Cleveland. But I get a call from a guy in Montreal saying, I think his name was Baba Singh. He said, I talked to the city Singh Sahib and he wants you to move to Montreal.
Where?
And I'm thinking to myself,
to move to Montreal.
Montreal. And I'm thinking to myself, this is what I'm thinking. Ice hockey, yes. And then I get a call from Gershubbed, who had just been asked to move from Montague in Western Mass to Dorchester, which is a suburb of Boston. And he says, the Siri Singh Sahib and I just spoke, and we decided to have you move to Boston. Now, I'm happy about that because I'm from that area. And so I call my wife up in Florida. I said, we're moving to Boston. She said, what? I said, we're moving to Boston. They're going to have me go first, and then you're going to come later. And so what they did is they sent her to Hartford, Connecticut, and she went through hell. And she's pregnant, and she's got a child that's, not that, a year old.
Yeah.
And she's going to be stuck there in Hartford while I'm in Boston. And they had just opened this Golden Temple Emporium, which you have to see what it was like. I mean, high rent district right across the street from Harvard University, Harvard Yard. I mean, it's all right there. And it's historic Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I'm like, this is cool, but the Emporium was basically a bunch of junk. They had cheap Hishi silver that people would string at the ashram. They bought conch shells from somewhere. They would sell them, and they'd buy plants from a florist and they would sell them. And I said, what is this? Well, I went in the back room. There was about 15 pair of Birkenstocks. And we had snow on the ground. In fact, the day I arrived in Boston, it was a blizzard. And I'm like, I'm going to sell these. So in 1 week, I sold all those Birkenstocks with snow on the ground. Well, that got back to Gershubbed and to Mahan Singh, who was then, he had become the head of the ashram in Dorchester because a gentleman left with his wife. And so he calls me and he goes, boy, you're a pretty good salesman. I said, what? I just was telling them what I would do and how I would do it, and people trusted it. And this is when Birkenstocks were like $25. Okay. And back then that was expensive, but I believed that they were quality, so I got into it. Well, from then we built a business around that. In the spring, we started ordering all the different styles and all the different sizes, from a child size to a size 15 men's, and we had Birkenstocks. But then people heard about it, so we started getting in these quality footwear people coming in from various vendors, brand new things that no one had ever heard of: Timberland, Rockport, Cole Haan. No one had ever heard of those lines before. They were all startup companies in New England, and they wanted to be in the Golden Temple Emporium. And so we were like, it was great. I mean, everybody wanted to be in our store. And I had to tell Timberland, no, you're not good enough. I did. They had to bring us up to New Hampshire and convince us to take their shoes, their boots. But we had other stuff. We were the first Red Wing store east of the Hudson River. We were the very first. Guys with turbans on. These people flew in from Minnesota. We want you to carry Red Wing, because we had their competitor, Chippewa, from Wisconsin. Anyway, for 5 years, I had fun. I just loved working in that. And then I'd work there from like 9 in the morning until 6 at night. Sometimes if we were open at night in the summer, I would work there. And then I would go down, take the train or the bus to Boylston Street and walk up to the Golden Temple Conscious Cookery on Massachusetts Avenue. And I'd work as a waiter.
Wow.
All right. One night.
And your wife and kids are still in Connecticut.
No, they after about 40 days, they ended up coming to Dorchester, and they had 4 houses in Dorchester. The main house was on Kenwood Street, and it was where the main house where the directors lived. But where we had sadhana. It's also where Siri Swami Kaur would be born in May of '76. Another home birth. Only this one was unique because she was breech, and we had to. But
Wow.
the doctor that delivered her had delivered other children in the ashram. My first Pavan was delivered by a midwife who had 12 children, 8 of which she self-delivered herself.
Oh my.
That woman's probably not alive anymore, but what a Mrs. Johnson, I'll never forget her. But this doctor, Dr. Ilya, he comes when he finds out that our child is breech and says, don't worry, don't worry. I've done lots of these. So he says, you have to tie a turban on my head. And he was Armenian, he was Christian. And I said, Dr. Ilya, you don't have to wear a turban. He goes, there's like her mother, my first wife, there was Gurbachin Kaur, there was Dharma Kaur, there was like 2 other women who were friends with my wife, and they were there, only women, and then me, the father. And so I had to tie a turban. I still have a picture of it. I tied a turban on his head, and he just went doop doop, brought the baby out. Perfect. She was perfect. She came rear first, as what happens in a breech, and she came out, and it was just beautiful, and it was incredible. So Siri Swami was born in 1976, and but we, in those days, I think those ashrams that existed in those days, everyone was sort of family connected. Everybody felt the coziness. You had the extended family. All right. Right around 1977, 78, we decided as an ashram in Dorchester that we were going to all have wills. Wills. And in 1976, December of 76, I legally changed my name from what it was, my birth name, to SatHanuman Singh Khalsa. And Pavan was born with Pavan Kaur, so that she went from my former last name to Khalsa. And my first wife, her name was legally changed to Satpurusha Kaur Khalsa. And then Siri Swami Kaur was born, Siri Swami Kaur, because the YB gave her that name, Siri Swami Kaur. And so I'm legally Khalsa. Okay, I didn't go by my birth name. I went by this because this is the lifestyle I was living. I had taken Amrit in 1974. I took Amrit. I was totally into this thing. So anyway, so now we got this.
Sounds like so far you're mostly sent around by the head honchos with titles, not by YB particularly, but
his name was invoked.
I was like, they always used his name to invoke the authority of their own authority. So for lack of a better word, it just sounds like it was like an early sausage fest that people were like so proud of their position and used it to like kind of be in power.
Yeah, and you just, as things evolved, there was much more of a democratic culture within the ashrams. People had to say. There was an equality. It wasn't an autocrat. It started autocratically, but then it became much more democratic. At least it appeared to be anyway.
At least, yeah, I think that's a good point too. And also that, the directors and all the titles, like all of this was implemented from him. So they're just copying suit what they're modeling, marrying people, giving names, ordering people around, because that's the teacher model that's being displayed.
I think by that point, people didn't arrange marriages at their local level. It was done by YB. Okay. He was the guy that everybody went to. If you want to get married, you want a spiritual name or a Sikh name, you go to him. Everything was done that way. I came around the early days when it was done at the ashram level. It was done in Tucson. It was done in Tucson. It was done in Florida. I don't know if it was done other places, but okay. So now I've got a family. Okay. We have other families. We're going through sharing that experience and that responsibility with people. People became godparents to people's family. There was a will made who was going to be, and my 2 daughters, their godparents would be Gurbachin Singh and Gurbachin Kaur, who worked at the Golden Temple. He worked at the Golden Temple Conscious Cookery because we were also not only a comfort footwear store, probably the first in the country, quality stuff, and the #1 Birkenstock store in the United States, by the way. We sold more Birkenstocks per week than anybody outside of a place in California that was a boutique shop because she brought them over in 66 or something. And by the way, Guru Ganesha, God bless him, he's the one that put Birkenstock on the map in the United States. He went around like Johnny Appleseed, planting seeds everywhere. And we had that situation, but the Gurbachins became my daughter's godparents.
These are the Gurbachins that are in New Mexico?
Correct. Okay. And Gurbachin Singh ended up in New Mexico because, so he started bringing in the Native American motif. He brought in Kachina dolls and vegetable dye Navajo rugs and beautiful turquoise and coral and jet and all these various stone.
You mean to the GT?
To the Golden Temple Emporium. So we had a really beautiful store. I mean, people shop there. I had Caroline Kennedy, Livingston Taylor, James Taylor's brother, Michael and Patrick Wayne and their wives, John Wayne's. They all came and shopped.
Now, whose business is this?
Well, it turns out it was Mahan Singh's, because he was the Harvard business graduate, and it was his business. It wasn't.
So you were just an employee of it, but obviously
I became like the top salesperson. There were like 2 other people that really were incredible partners in this. And we ended up opening up a second store in what would be like the equivalent of Park Avenue in New York. It's Boylston Street. So I had to bring that. So when you started that store in 1976, we were lucky if we made $100 a day. When that store was open for, I think, about 14, 15 years, I worked there 5 years. And we were making $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a day easily. And then the one in Harvard, in Boston, we had to bring that up to snuff. So I did that. But I also said to Mahan Singh, because he said, "Can you do that?" I said, "If we do that, it's a we, not a me. It's we. I want you to take us all out to dinner, and also I want a raise, and you'll make me the official manager of one of the 2 stores." It's a deal. We brought it up to what he needed. We surpassed it. And he didn't do what he said he was going to do. He paid me a flat $200 a week, and I worked at both the restaurant and the shoe store, or the Emporium, and he didn't. And so I realized I could.
You didn't get a raise. You didn't get a manager position. You didn't nothing.
No, he had an attitude that kind of branded me for a long time. It said, "I believe in the Peter principle." He said, "You reach to a certain level, and that's all you go. You don't go any higher." And I went, okay. So I left the ashram in 1980. I loved being there. I loved the family and everything, but I decided Gurbachans took over the ashram in Albuquerque that was once held by the guy I told him he was full of you-know-what, Bahadur Singh. So he left 3HO and all that, and so they were sent there. And of course, he wanted to be Gurbachan Singh, God bless him, and God bless Gurbachan Kaur, wonderful people. I mean, I saw my kids and their kids were like brother and sister, okay? Grew up that way. But they wanted to be close to the Sri Singh Sahib, as we called it. You know, they wanted to be close to the YB. So that's what happened. They ended up going there, and everybody knows who they are, and they're still there, and they're good people. We just don't see eye to eye on some things now. But so anyway, I moved back to Florida because my mother was having some operation, and we figured, all right, let's go down there. We went back to Florida. I don't like Florida. I never liked Florida. You know, I mean, I was stationed in Florida in the military. I graduated from high school in Florida, and I started Baba Siri Chand, doing this yoga in Florida. But now I got to go back because of responsibility with family. And Sampuran, remember, I'm back in Florida again. So like, it's like, wow, I'm back here again. And he says, the Siri Singh Sahib wants me to buy the house adjacent to Baba Siri Chand. Will you move into it and pay the rent? All right. That was fine. Our kids could grow up together. This is in 1980. But 1983 comes along, and Gurbachan Singh says to me, "You should send Pavan Kaur to India to go with Bachchan Kaur." They were sisters, they were really close. And I said, "I can't afford to do that." He goes, "I'll take care of this if you take care of this." And so he helped out. I said, "Okay, you're being a good godparent." And we did. That was 83. Pavan was 8 years old. I would not see Pavan Kaur for 2 years because we know what happened between 1983 and 1985. It was 1984. And even though they were in Masuri at 8,000 feet in the Himalayan, foothills, they had to deal with what was going on in the lower levels in Delhi and Amritsar, with the massacre that happened in the Golden Temple. 2 years not seeing your daughter. And Sri Swami Kaur went over the year she went over in 84.
Wow.
So I saw her 9 months later, but I didn't see Pavan for 2 years. So when they finally came home, it was like, oh my God, this is incredible. So happy to be family and do things together and see our daughters. And they were just great. I had gone over in 85, by the way. My wife saved some money up. She said, "I want you to go visit the kids." So I flew over, went over with Garage Car, Narinyan's mom.
Yep.
Omkar was the same age as my daughter. They were going to school in Masuri. Went with a Garage Car. It was like 20 adults from East Coast, and I guess maybe in Canada. And we went over, and they had 120 kids at the school, and nobody could go to the Punjab because of what was going on, the previous year. So it was decided some people were going to go to Rishikesh or something like that, but the other choice was Hemkund Sahib. And I was really into Guru Gobind Singh, so I wanted to go to this mystical place, Hemkund Sahib. So I did, and I climbed those 1,000 steps with my daughter. Helped me just 20 steps, then go 20 steps, and I did that, to get to 1,000 steps until I got there in the early morning, and that was the most incredible experience. Wow. Wonderful experience. And so that was my first time. Now, flash forward, winter solstice, 1985. My wife and I bring a gift, as you always did, to YB. And it was for BBG too, because they were both there. And BBG looks at me and she goes, "Aren't you a Singh Sahib?" And I said, "No, BBG, I'm not a Singh Sahib." And she says to him in Punjabi, and he looks at me with those eyes like he's looking at your aura. I don't know what he was looking at, but he said, "Yeah." And she says, "You are now." So on the Christmas Day, 1985, I become a minister, which shocked some foreign, because remember, we're in Florida, winter solstice, and we're at the host ashram is Baba Siri Chand, and all these people are like, "How'd that happen? He became a minister?" And so it was an interesting thing. But that was interesting. So now,
just for clarification, back then he just titled people. There weren't things you did. It was just like, you're this, and it kind of created this internal hierarchy.
He would say things like, "This guy is a perfect sadhana. You need to do a really good sadhana talking to the quote unquote Khalsa council. This guy, he's going to be a Mukhya Singh Sahib now." Or this guy ran a region, or he'd make him an overall regional thing. And the way you look back on it now, it was like multi-level marketing. It was like a franchise.
It reminds me of that. I was in the industry for a decade, and it reminds me of how you pit your leaders against each other. Yeah. How terrible that is.
But interesting enough, so, okay, now this is 1985, and my close friend Shiva Singh, who I knew when he was in Ithaca, New York, he was married, his first wife, and they would come down and do seva.
Brother and sister of Guru Raj. Brother of Guru Raj Kaur.
Brother of Guru Raj. And so they came down, stayed at our house, and said, "This is where CBB comes into play." Okay. So they come down in 85 and said, "Are you going down to Fort Lauderdale to Khalsa Council meetings? Because YB is starting a new company." They didn't have a name for it, and he needs salespeople. "You should be there, SatHanuman." And I said, "I wasn't called. Nobody asked me to do it." So they went down. That was December of 85. April of 86, I got a call from a guy in LA. His name was Siri Sant Singh. SSS, like Siri Singh Sahib, right? SSS, Siri Sant Singh. He calls me up. I don't know who he is. He says, "This SatHanuman Singh, I heard you're a really good salesman." I said, "Well, who told you that?" He said, "Oh, a few people I've talked to, and I wonder if you'd be interested in being the Southeast sales manager for CBB." And I go, "What's CBB?" Then he told me, Community Business Bureau, or
brokers, right?
Mm-hmm. And I said, "What's the pay?" Because here I am. I'm like, I'm going to drop everything and do this. Fortunately, my wife was doing her own business, but I went, "All right, what is it?" He goes, "It's commission only." Again, multi-level marketing. It's like, "Oh, what is the?" "Well, you got this much money coming in from Golden Temple Bakery, Wagyu chews, and some 4 bags of granola. And Yogi Tea is like, you might get like, I don't know, $50 to $100 a month commission on that, because it's only 1 box of tea. And then Nanak's Cookies has 4 cookies, which they don't even exist anymore." And that was it. And then I got a call from a woman called Krishna Kaur. Everybody knows who Krishna Kaur is. And she says, I'm the president of Soothing Touch Sunshine, and I just fired the broker in the Southeast. I'm hiring you." So now I got the 4 businesses that are part of the natural foods industry. And I have to go out and start making appointments and going around. And I'm in the South. I'm in the deep South. And so I have no problem. I'll go out and do it. And I did it. And I got to know the distributor, the main distributor. I got to build relationships with retailers. And word got out in the industry that if you want someone in the Southeast, hire the guy with the turban, hire SatHanuman. So I was the first person to represent kettle chips on the East Coast. 1986. I was I don't know if you heard of Morinu Tofu. It was from Japan. I represented Morinu Tofu. And then other companies started hiring me. I represented every company in Oregon, all of them. Nancy's Yogurt, Kettle Chips, Oregon Chai, Garden Burger, all of them. So my region in the South, which is not exactly, I'd say it's not new. It's not California. It's not Southern or Northern California.
Right.
It's not even the Northwest. It's not the Northeast. It's like the health food industry, you know, vitamins and stuff. And I'm selling a thing called Yogi Tea to people who went, get out of here. You know? So I knew how to build relationships. So people who might have got along with this person who was not wanting to see me, talk to that person, hey, this is great stuff. And so networking, and that helped, you know? And so my part of the country, we had 12 people in the country. Shiva was in the Northeast, I was in the Southeast, and then there were people in the West and in the Midwest and the Southeast, and everybody was responsible to do and have those same Yogi Tea, Golden Temple, Soothing Touch. And I was getting more companies in the South. I was being hired by a juice company from Vermont and all these other, Alba Botanica, which is in the industry now, is starting out. All these people were wanting someone on the East Coast or the Southeast. And Shiva got a couple companies, I got a bunch. And this is from 86 to 93, right? And 93, oh, by the way, in 92, I had an amicable separation and divorce from my first wife after 20 years. Wonderful woman, fantastic mother, awesome lady. But I fell in love with this other woman and we got married. And we're still married, almost 30 years now. And her name is Amrit Kaur. And so we got married in 92, and the Siri Singh Sahib, or the CMA as he was called too in business, the Chief Management Authority, the CMA. He had many titles. People, Siri Singh Sahib, Mahan Tantric, you know, Yogi G, you know.
CMA, that's a new one.
Yeah, Chief Management Authority, that's what people called him because he ran all the businesses. He was the Grand Poobah, you know. And so he says, SatHanuman and Amrit will move to Roswell, Georgia, which is where Liptar is, and run the Southeast out of there. And he then hired the man who was married to my first wife. And I won't even go into that's a bigger story because it's a side story. But you know how you were talking to Tej? He goes, you have 4 siblings in 3HO and your Tej car had 4. Well, I have an extended family that just goes on like, you know, tentacles.
In 3HO.
In 3HO, but I only have one sister in 3HO, but all these people, the Livtars, for instance, okay? Now,
is your son-in-law Livtar's son?
Only son, Sapir Singh.
Okay. I was double checking. Okay,
I am so blessed. I'm so blessed. Well, not my blessed, my wife is blessed. I mean, my daughter's blessed and my grandchildren.
Well, if I hear correctly too, both your daughters married into children that were born in the Dharma and kids that they were raised with. Is that right?
Exactly. So they went to school with.
That's
I mean, not many people can say, you know, your daughter went to school with the man she married as a young
toddler, like babies.
Yeah, and then because Sabir and Pavan were born in 74, and Sarah was born in 71, I think.
Yeah.
He's like 49 now, and then Siri Swami was born in 76. So these two guys would end up going to school together and then leave Midi Piti, and even Siri Swami went to Guru Ramdas Academy. I think it was in Dehradun before they moved to Midi Piti. And so they got married in 94. I get married and remarried in 92. Live in Roswell, Georgia. Livtars are there. I'm running the business, and I'm not just seeing Georgia or Atlanta and Savannah and Athens, Georgia. I'm seeing Memphis, Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee. I'm covering 11 states by driving.
Wow.
Nobody flew, you drove. And I was expanding the business and the footprint of our companies and represent in the Deep South with a turban on everywhere I went. I think because I'm white, that privilege carried me through because nobody really tried to, you know, what are you doing here? You got, you know, with that. So I didn't run into that. And then, so was there 4 years. Amrit and I had a wonderful place. We lived right near where the Livtars were, and business grew. And then we got called from Gurdon, who is now running SGN. SGN takes over CBB in 93. YB reconstructed, they rebranded, they changed it from this only by commission independent contractor to now a business.
So why do you think that happened?
because I think things were being found out with other businesses that there was some illegitimacy and maybe illegality going on, and they had to restructure it because we were bringing in money. We were bringing in a lot of money. When you take all of those businesses, now in 93, when they switched it over, I got a call from somebody from, California offering me a new position as the Southeast sales manager, which I had already been since 86, but now I'm getting this new position. I said, what is this? He goes, we haven't, did you hear about the new company we've started? I said, what are you talking about? SGN. I said, what's that? Siri Guru Nanak. I said, wow, okay. And so my wife and I, we had a Guru Granth Sahib in our home. We said our das, we took a hukum, and we decided we were going to let them have Yogi Tea and Sunshine and Golden Temple, and we were going to keep the other 20 companies that we had grew over the last few years, 7 years. We were doing really well, except 30% of what we made as a commission every month went to YB. 30%.
In your CBB contract or in this SDN contract?
There was no contract. There was no contract. He was the boss. It was in the contract with the vendors we represented, and they didn't like it. People heard about, like, why am I sending a commission all the way to LA when you're doing the job? I want you to hire more people. You need that money to expand. It's for me. That's what every business, legitimate business, was saying. So
what was your response to that?
I said, look, do you like what I'm doing? Are you sad? Are you happy with what I'm doing for you? Yes, but we want you to do more. I mean, I literally had, when contracts would get up, they would have to, they basically let me hire. Remember, I had that one person who was in Florida that took over all the stuff that I had built in Florida, and he was married to my first wife. And so I got Amrit. She's with me. She runs the administration part. He's running the Florida, and I'm taking care of the States. And nobody was saying, like, but you're driving to Virginia and you're driving to Tennessee and Alabama. Are you happy? The sales are happening, right? The business is expanding, right? Yeah. So I was able to kind of get them to trust me, right? And everything worked out, at least to that point, until 96. We're finishing, or 95. We're finishing for 4 years of living in Atlanta. Go ahead.
But this is CBB's ending and SGN is start. Have you agreed to SGN already?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay.
So and remember, also context for the listener, like, what these entities really are, and you're representing lots of companies, but reiterate some of the companies you've brought to the map, as well as what companies within the Khalsa, within KIIT, all this represents.
All right. A company from the first one I got was Kettle Chips. I called up then Nirbhau Singh, who's Cameron Healy, and I called him up and said, why aren't Kettle Chips on the East Coast? And he said, I don't have anybody represent me. I said, send me the 4 chips. I'll put them into distribution. And he did. So for 7 years, I represented Kettle Chips. I got called by a body care line that had just started called Alba Botanica, a company out of Tokyo called Morinaga Nutrition, or Morinu Tofu. They were unique because it was aseptically packaged, and you could put it in all kinds of places in a store, and it's not going to go bad. It didn't have to be refrigerated. So I did a lot of demos. So I would be a company in Vermont.
What I'm trying to understand, though, is all these different companies come to you. Yeah. You're the salesman that gets them into stores, right? So that they can be sold to consumers.
Right.
But you're actually just the sales regional manager, so to speak, and 30% of all the commissions you bring in go right to YB, and then you get a percentage of what's left over?
Well, I get the difference is for me to fuel my car, stay in a hotel, and a lot of times I slept in the car. I mean, you're talking about, remember, you're talking about Yogi Tea before it became the Ayurvedic line of what is, expanding from that one single box of tea to 4 teas and 8 teas and 16 and 32. Golden Temple was 4 bags of granola and about, several bulk granolas. And I got that into distribution. So you're building that, and then you get these other companies, and you're probably making, maybe $10,000 a month, and you're living on $7,000 out of that. You got to have a salary to take care of your family, and then you also have to pay your expenses. So that 30% was a big deal, not having that. But remember, the mission is all that's important. Trust the teacher, trust the vision of the teacher. He knows what's going on, and you do that. And everybody is, that's it. So you do that. And so my wife and I we bought into it. I mean, you know, and then comes, we were there for 4 years. We had a really nice life in Roswell, Georgia. Everything was going great. And then we got a call from Guru Dan, who's now running SGN. And he's in Brooklyn. And he said, Siri Singh Sahib wants you to move to Millis. No, he said, yeah. Well, what happened was my friend Kurban Singh, who's no longer part of 3HO, wonderful guy, an awesome guy. He was offered, they closed down the Golden Temple Emporium. Remember, we worked together in Boston in Harvard Square. After 14 years, they closed that successful business down because Mahan wanted to kind of cut his losses, leases going up, and people lost their jobs. So now Kurban, who's put his heart and soul into this mission in that store, is now without a job. And so YB offers him $1,000 a month. And Mahan, Kurban goes, what? $1,000 a month to live in Boston? I'm out of here. And that kind of broke him, and he just left. He left everything. I stayed in touch with him, but he left. And so I called up and said, before you hire anybody up in the Northeast, move us back to New England. That's my home. I want to go back. And so they did. They paid our way.
Who?
KIIT.
Okay.
You know, we were being funded by Golden Temple and Akal Security and all these companies who were making the money. And they saw that, hey, we got to hold on to this guy. He's a gold mine. What I forgot to tell you, though, is when they changed the name, and I told you we took a hook'em and we said no. Remember, we said no, and I said, we're going to keep our companies. You can have the 3HO businesses.
You said no to SGN, keep those, we'll keep ours.
Yeah, but that didn't go over too well because YB knew a gold mine when he saw it. And so he called me up at 4 o'clock in the morning from LA and said, son, I need you to do me a favor. And I went, yes, sir. He goes, I need you and Amrit Kaur to stay with us. This is our, my vision, and you are going to da, 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 da. And I went, my wife began to cry, and I went, yes, sir. And we just kept up. So now they've got us, because without us, they didn't have much on the East Coast. And a lot of the other regions were not growing as quickly as we were. And so now if they put me in the Northeast, the Southeast is cooking. If they put me in the Northeast, and they moved Shiva, by the way, to Chicago, and he replaced this other guy who was kind of a weird, anyway, just Shiva replaced that person. They moved him. He had gone from Ithaca to Millis, and from Millis to Chicago. And so he's in the Midwest, and I moved up to New England, and I'm in seventh heaven. I'm home again. I get to see blizzards and beautiful leaves on trees in the fall, and all that history that I grew up with, and I'm like happy as a lark. And so I did that. But now our business is really growing. Things that I had only in the Southeast are now also on the East Coast, because I'm in the North. And they said, well, if you're there, we're going to hire the whole East Coast, right? So now my job, as it was given to me, is not only do I have stores to see all over the 6 New England states, which is not as much as driving all over the South, but it's still a lot of driving. Bangor, Maine is 5 hours from Boston. So once a month up to Bangor, Maine, I made the best of all of this, but we grew. And the key factor is the distributors were growing at the same time we were. There was no Whole Foods back then, not to the degree it is anywhere near today. People had independent stores. I helped stores grow. We watched stores go from small little stores to having 2 20,000 square foot stores. And, those are stores that are now Whole Foods. But we helped those stores in the South, and then we had to do it. And there's a lot of co-ops in the Northeast. So working with those folks, there was a beautiful distributor in Vermont called Northeast Cooperative. I enjoyed that. The distributors on New England would eventually marry themselves or merge with distributors out West. And they became United Natural Foods, or UNFI. And today they are the national distributor in this industry. Wow. And so we were connected with them. Everybody trusted us. If somebody said, who do I hire on the East Coast? They went, you hire SatHanuman, you hire Gurdon, you hire SGN, because we had built so much trust. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, of all the things YB ever taught, the one that resonated with me is what makes the sales successful. And I know that Guru Ganesha would agree with this too. The success of a sale is built on trust. That's it. Once people trust you, you can bring them something they've never heard of, and they'll trust you and they'll buy it. So you better be bringing them the quality that they always look to you, that they trusted. And goodwill is also the other part of it. Those were words that YB said to a bunch of us. Shiva Singh was there and other people were there. And he said, trust and goodwill is what builds sales. I'm like, well, there's some pearls of wisdom that I resonate with. So I knew how to do this. And by the way, I have no formal sales training. You know where I started my sales training? You know where I learned how to sell? I'll tell you exactly. When I was 10 years old, my father said every Christmas he would say, the TV show, the movie's on, and he wanted me to watch it. The Miracle on 34th Street, the black and white version. And I realized if you are honest with your customers, you send them to the competitor, they'll come back. Remember, that's what happened in the Miracle on 34th Street. It was embedded in my consciousness. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. And I treated people that way, and so it worked. So I'm now up in Millis and loving it, living on 17 acres of land, property. We've got everything. We have a good wara. We are doing sadhana together. Again, extended family, beautiful experience. YB would come every fall for what they called the Fall Yoga Festival, and he would come and do his thing. And I was just really enjoying it. And I started doing a lot of outreach, interfaith work and stuff in the Boston area. I think I wrote in my introduction to you that the highlight of being in the South was teaching in the prison. That to me was my high point of teaching Kundalini Yoga, was teaching in the prisons. And
you also began that quite early, I guess as early as like 1973, compared to when, quote, and I know George McMillan had talked about doing a really early prison program too, but before it became kind of like an official thing.
I hate to revert back because we've gone so far, but let me just quickly tell you that's a great story. Sampuran, the director of Baba Siri Chand, got a letter from an inmate in a medium security prison who was in there for armed robbery or something. This medium security means you're not in there for rape, you're not in there for murder, you're in there for drug-related things or breaking and entering, things like that. So you're like a first offender type person, but you're still a risk. So they put you in what's called a medium security. It's a state prison. He gets a letter from an inmate, a gentleman who happened to be white, and said, I want to learn how to meditate. Could someone from your ashram come? And Sampuran didn't want to do it. So he called me up and said, SatHanuman Singh, you're going to go on Friday night to this prison. The prison was 80 miles away. I didn't have a vehicle. He said, just take the ashram vehicle, which was somebody else's VW microbus, and we'll pay for the gas. And I drove. I'd leave at like 4:30 in the afternoon. I'd get there about 6:30, and the class would be at 7. Well, when I first got there, I had this one student. I said, why do you want to do yoga and meditate? He goes, because I really love Bruce Lee. And I love martial arts, and Bruce Lee meditated, and I want to learn how to do it so I can put that in with my martial arts. I said, all right. And after a discussion with him, I sort of like fished him out of where he was, because I kind of intuitively knew where this was going. And I said to him, okay, for me to come back here and for us to pay for the gas and to be here and for me to teach, you need to have about 5 more students. And he said, oh, I can do that. I said, yeah, but 3 of them have to be African-American. They have to be Black.
Wow.
And he went, and he said, I'm not doing yoga with no, you know what, N-word. And I said, well, you're on your own. I said, you're the one who wanted me to come. I'm not going. He said, oh, okay, well, I think I can fix it. So the following week I come back, he's got like 12 people in the class, of which 80% of them were Black.
Wow.
And so I have to, I'm getting these people going. And that class lasted for 2 years. 9 of them got early releases from prison. 9 of them actually on their own, not because they would ask a lot of questions. When I would show up for a 2-hour class on Friday night, they sweated and they just got all their negativity out, learned how to do this stuff. And they also, 9 of them out of 65 inmates who would come to my class every Friday night, and 9 of them got early releases. They call me up and they tell me, I just got early release to a work program, 3 o'clock in the morning. They would call me at the house, the ashram. And I stayed in touch with that one for about, I was 75. Yeah, for about 25 years later, I got a call from this guy in Fiji, the original guy who called and wanted us to teach a class. So he grew through the experience. It was just so amazing just to see that happen.
That's so cool. My dad also taught in maximum security prisons in Arizona, so I'm familiar a bit.
I taught at Rayford Prison, which is near Gainesville. That's a federal prison, but it only was a couple of times because these people were so out there that they didn't want to. But the medium guys, they were like, you care about us? You're willing to drive that? In fact, they tried to get retroactively me paid by the state of Florida. They wrote a letter saying how much, they had, I think we were sponsored by the, some like the Kiwanis Club or somebody like that. So there was a lot, but then I got moved. Remember, I got moved from there to this Cleveland thing. So, all right, back to Millis.
Yeah, going back with selling, right?
So anything is going great. We're not really great, but everything's going good, and I'm trusting the mission. And my wife managed about 4 people in an office that ran the East Coast. We have about now, I have 9 people I'm managing in the Northeast. We have 5 managers, of which one of them wasn't a Sikh. We had Gurdon, my wife and I, and my first wife became part of the company, and her husband. So now we got those, and we're pretty much running the East Coast, and it's successful, and everyone's going along. We're being paid not that well. We're getting, now he gets 100% of the commissions, Yogi Tea.
Who does? For what? For selling what?
Why? See, SGN is his company.
So he's getting 100% of the commissions versus in the CBB, he got 30%.
The difference was I was an independent contractor. Now I work for the company. So now I'm being paid a salary.
Oh.
So I'm being paid about $45,000. My wife is being paid about 30-some thousand.
You're not also getting a commission on your sales?
No. Well, theoretically I was, but I wasn't. I saw, every year you'd see, I can look at my Social Security now and say, oh, it bumped up to 60-some thousand one year, but then it went back down. What happened? So they started hiring people and paying, and they, you can't get away with this kind of pay to your people that are going to be hired in the real, out there in the real sales world. You got to pay them pretty good to stay, right? You got to keep
a salesperson, absolutely.
So I was bought and sold. I mean, I'm already bought in, hook, line, and sinker. I'm devoted. This is a mission. Guru Ram Das is covering for me. Everything told me that. Everything told me that. Yeah. So anyway, I was going to tell you a story about that song, one of those songs that I sent you, but that was when we lived in Atlanta, but that was an amazing story. But I can tell you that what I learned through this whole experience over the last 50 years is that the power of prayer really it works. And with the focus on just focusing on one thing, whether it was what you called Guru Ram Das or what you called the Shabad, or you call the divine, or if you focus and really have that strong devotion, I always found that it worked. It worked. I mean, things that I couldn't believe I would have otherwise failed, or something would have happened to me, I always was able to come out of it and be successful. So there was legitimately a great story that happened one night when I was driving from Atlanta to Gettysburg. Because if I remember in my bio, I told you I did living history for 12 years. I was a living historian. I did Civil War, that history is my passion. So I was driving, I finished my road trip, and I left my wife back in Roswell, and I was driving up to Gettysburg. And I got into rural Virginia, not over on the east part where the interstate is, but in the rural part of Virginia. And on a Thursday night, I'm listening to this CD in my car, James Taylor singing Country Road live. It was great. I'm rocking out. I'm just feeling it really good. And I look down at my odometer and it says, you're on empty. You're on empty. And I went, oh no. And so I turned the music off and I started chanting and singing, only me hearing it, out loud. And then I saw a bank and I only had, I think I had a Shell credit card, but I didn't have any, and then I had a bank card, but I don't know if things work like they do today where you could get money. Yeah, you could get money out. But anyway, I drove into the bank and it said, we're out of cash. I got no money. I got the Shell card, which means I got to find a Shell station in rural Virginia, in the Blue Ridge Mountain area. And I'm like, oh boy. And so I'm still chanting for an hour and a half. And that thing on the gas gauge went below empty. I should be for an hour. It's like that. And I should be bone dry.
Wow.
And I come over the crest of a hill and I see this Shell station sign. I've been chanting for an hour plus. I see the Shell station sign. I pull in. I quickly pump myself gas. It actually went over the amount that said it was in my tank. So I really was on bone dry. I don't know how that happened, except something just took care of me the whole way. Now, here's the funny part. I walk into the place where you pay. And this is when they had the knuckle breaker things. They didn't do it like they do today. They put your thing down and they like this, with your hand, and then you sign it, right? And they give you a receipt from that thing. So the guy comes in, doesn't say a word to me. I go into where he has it. I said, I am so grateful that you're open. Thank you so much. He doesn't say a word. He doesn't say anything to me. He does that. I sign it. He gives me a receipt. I said, thank you, sir, for staying open. He didn't say a word. Nothing. I'm talking to myself. I walk outside over the threshold of the front door, and the lights on the Shell station go off. The lights in the office go off, and it's done. And I'm like, I literally broke down in tears.
Wow.
I called my wife. I said, you're not going to believe what just happened. And I still, to this day, I was the only one there. So you have to believe that this was like the Twilight Zone.
Wow.
Or like, something like weird. But yet I felt really like, God, I was so taken care of. And I think that kind of stayed with me in India, stayed with me in all kinds of challenging circumstances. So that was a little vignette. I love that, what happened that time. But now we're up here. I'm in New England, 10 years. YB comes out every year, does this thing, always stays with the wealthy guy in the ashram. We're all, again, Sevadars, and then what happens is we start meeting as managers of SGN on the East Coast, and we decide, how are we going to grow? We got to learn computer skills. We got to learn all this technology. We need to expand our company. And I said, well, I have an idea. There's a guy over at one of these distributors that really trusts us and like us. What if I asked him to come work for this? He carries with him a lot of weight in this industry. It'll really help us grow better. Gurdon just, you sure? I said, yeah. Nobody really believed it could happen. But again, I had built really good relationships with people. And I went in to see him one day, and he says, go to lunch. And he goes, I would be honored to work with you guys. Well, now they're going to fly him out. This is 2002. They're going to fly him out to Anaheim, which is the big industry show out there. And I'm like going to be kept in the loop. All of us are. We bring our salespeople from the East Coast. We're all staying at these hotels in Anaheim. And I go, Gurdon, what's going on? What's happening? Did you meet with him? Did you take care? We'll talk about it later, SatHanuman. I said, what do you mean we'll talk about it later? It was my idea. Why don't you share with me? We'll talk about it later. We're going to get on the bus and go to dinner with one of our principals. I said, I'm not getting on the bus until you tell me. He said, he became he is a sociopath. The guy's a sociopath. I don't care who's listening to this. Gurdon is a sociopath. He is the mirrored image of what I finally realized was YB. Mm. And I think Tej said the same thing in your thing. Mm. You start to realize the narcissism, the sociopath. Well, Gurdon was my wife recognized it first, and then I started to realize the veil came down. I went, oh my God. Because what happened when you disagree with somebody like that, they shut down and they treat you like you're a non-entity. Mm. And that's what he did. Not only did he do that, but he set people out to try and find if they could get anything on me. Here's a guy who for 16 years has built this thing on the East Coast, and now you're going to try to find a way to bring me down, and they couldn't find anything. So this was in, I think, April of 2002, and by May, one of the companies we represented offered me a job, and I said, you should hire my wife, because she was making like nothing, and she was doing all the work. So she got hired, and she boosted her salary up about 40%, and I stayed, and they didn't see her go out the door. So she slipped under the wire, and I'm still there until Gurdon basically demotes me.
No.
Tells the people I'm managing, you're now going to be managed by this guy in the South, right? The guy who was in Florida. He's now going to manage the whole East Coast. And SatHanuman's job is just going to be, he's the person to get things into distribution. So I figured I can handle this. I've been through so much in this organization. I've been so much, I can do this. And I think I lasted about 2 months. Wow. And then I realized, hey, sweetheart, my dog's coming, has to go to the bathroom. My wife's going to take her out to the bed. We have a beautiful corgi. She's such a sweet. And so then what happens is I finally realized I can't do this anymore. YB, this is 2002. YB is really not doing well, right? He's had surgeries and stuff like that. And I'm thinking like, he's my teacher. My wife and I felt the same way. I called up a woman who was part of his staff, Siri Guru. She ran all the businesses. She was like the head of all of these businesses. And I called her up and I said, I couldn't call Gurdon because I didn't trust him, but I thought I could trust her. I later would find out I couldn't trust her either, but I didn't know. She said, SatHanuman, you deserve a severance pay. You built this company. I said, I'm going to walk away and just take my salary that I already have, give me my last paycheck and any unused vacation time pay. And will you sign? And she said, you really need it. I said, no. And then Gurdon calls me up 2 days later because he hears about it. He says, are you sure you don't want anything? And I'm like a fool. I said, no, I just want to walk away. So I had to sign a disclaimer that said I will never say anything negative about anybody at KIIT or SGN. And I did. And I said to the person who asked me to sign it, who was in LA, I said, are you guys going to sign it too? Oh, yeah. Well, I started going after a job in the industry. Remember, I was well known at that time and nobody would hire me. So I thought, this is ridiculous. Then I heard from a vendor saying, the reason why you're not getting hired is because Gurdon has told everybody in the industry that if they hire you, these are companies that knew me, he would drop the lines. And so people were just growing and they didn't know who to trust.
You're kidding.
Yeah. So I went, oh, I'm fine anyway. I went on from there and
wait, before you keep going, why did you walk away without a severance pay or without trying to say like, you owned a percentage of the company?
Because I was naive and I was feeling like it was my teacher who gave us this opportunity. And we decided we're not going to take anything from him. Little did I know that all this time he was taking from us. Right? He was living off of us. All these things now that I've shared with you are a lot of processes that I've gone through to realize this stuff.
During the time you didn't know, you were just devoted and hardworking. And did you have experiences in your sales career and with your family where you knew you were being underpaid and you just sucked it up and did it?
Yeah.
Like you lived from that place. You knew.
Remember all these steps along the way, being sent to Washington, D.C. on a Greyhound bus by the then director, by all these places. You kind of like, I mean, you look back at it now, I said, what kind of a fool was I? I just went wherever they told me.
Right.
You know, like I was doing temporary duty in the military. I was like, you know, you're getting covered. Everything's covered. We're paying for your trip up there and we're going to cover you on food. And you don't think about all the things like retirement or, you know, all that.
Your children's education.
I didn't come from like an affluent family that had an inheritance. I was just this guy who was devoted. And that's it. So unfortunately for me,
yes, you can't get hired. Yes. So now bringing you back. So now you can't get hired. You find out Gurdon's bad mouthing or telling vendors not to hire you specifically.
Yeah. So then I contacted YB because you know I had a relationship with him too, and I said, "You better get this to stop," and it immediately stopped. It stopped and just dead in its tracks. But the damage was done. A lot of people. This really wasn't going to. I didn't know if I could do it. I felt insecure about what can I go from here. So I ended up walking into a Whole Foods store near the ashram outside of, Millis. And the grocery manager said, "What are you doing in here? Or how are you doing? Or I haven't seen you in a while." And I said, "Hey, can you put me to work?" And he said, "There's a new store opening up on Hingham, which is in Cape Cod. And you know the manager because he just moved from another store. Go down and see John." And I went down there and he came out of his office. "So, what are you doing here?" I said, "Put me to work." He said, "I don't have any management positions. They're all filled." I said, "Put me in any position." He said, "Where do you want to work?" I said, "I'll do customer service." Done. So now I'm working at Whole Foods in this beautiful store in New England. And nobody said, "Well, you can't wear a turban." No, everybody knew me because I was in the industry, right? So I was happy. It was a long drive to get there every day, but it was fantastic. It was great. And then what happened is that we had an opportunity to move to Portland, or actually move to the West Coast. We could have lived anywhere on the West Coast. We thought, wouldn't this be great? We have grandchildren. Our daughters live in Eugene.
Your daughters are both living in
Eugene.
And were they working for dharmic companies this whole time?
Yep. Golden Temple. Yogi
Both
Tea.
your kids and their husbands?
Well, they worked at different times for call security, for TEG security, and then Golden Temple and Yogi Tea. Okay. And so we decided, I came out here with my wife and I, Amrit and I flew out here, and we went to Seattle. They had 3 stores in Seattle, Whole Foods did, and they had 1 store in Portland. And the 3 stores in Seattle said, "We'll hire you right now." And I thought, well, that's going to be a long drive from Seattle to visit family in Eugene. Portland's 2 hours difference. And my wife, who is now the West Coast sales manager for a company that she got hired by, they're the one, that's how we got moved out here. He paid our way to get out here.
Her job.
Her job.
Wow.
And so she has to be near a big airport, and Portland's a big airport. Now comes another chapter of my life. what am I going to do now? Because the Whole Foods store in Portland was only store and they didn't have an opening. So one day around December of 2005, my wife says to me, why don't you go down to the airport and apply for, they're hiring at TSA. And I'm like, what? Why would I do that? SatHanuman, you'd be really good at this. And then I left a part of my story out that's critically important. In 2001, I was in New York City when 9/11 happened. Not because I lived in New York City, but because I had a doctor I had to see because of a frozen shoulder. And I drove on September 10th, 2001, from Boston to New York. And in the night I ride in, the skyline's there, the World Trade Center's there. The next morning, you know what happened. And I'm in New York. So I was there until the 15th. So I knew that when this position happened, that if I applied for this job, if I got it, I would be an asset to our community because I would be in a major airport and I'd be looking the way I do, you know. So I applied, and it was so easy. I went in, it was like, this is no problem. I can do this. And I did. I got hired in May of 2006. And immediately after I got hired, I get a call from the Department of Homeland Security in Arlington, Virginia. And then an hour later from the Transportation Security Administration in Arlington, Virginia. This is right near the Pentagon, is where their headquarters is. They called me up and said, we need you. I found out I was the first Sikh American, first turban wearing Sikh to work for this new agency that had started after 9/11. And they wanted me to train everybody. They wanted me to be involved in all that stuff. So the guy who ran the airports in Oregon, he, every state had a regional person who ran it. There were, a government official that ran it. And he really took to me. When I got hired, he took to me and he says, I like your positive energy and everything. He said, I want you to be part of this council. I was never on the Khalsa Council, but I got appointed to the National Advisory Council to TSA.
Wow.
So now I'm one of 65 people in all the United States and all territories to be in what was called the National Advisory Council. And I would be there for 2 years, going back and forth from Portland to Washington, D.C., and staying there a week and doing projects and being involved in that. And then also when I came back to Oregon, I was training people in law enforcement, as much as the FBI and other things, about who we are, because nobody knew back then. In those early 2000s, just because Bin Laden's picture was on the TV, everybody started freaking out. Who's that guy with the turban? Oh, you're a threat. And I had to change that in the little way I could. So it was an interesting experience being part of TSA and having on the front line and having people have their video cameras up, filming you or saying, I'm not walking in with a terrorist working for the government, and all that stuff. But I worked there 6 years, and then I left when I was just about to turn 62, and I thought, well, who's going to hire me now? After it was a good experience for the most part, but I decided that I would retire. So from the age of 62 until I was 63, I was pretty much living on Social Security. And my wife, Amrit, called me up one day and said, you want to go back to work in the natural products industry? I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, because she worked for this other company. And she said, there's a job opening for this thing and you could do it with your eyes closed. So I came back. I got Social Security to freeze, that stuff. And I had to go back to work. And then I started, and I've been with that company now for, in July, it'll be 8 years. And she's been with the company longer than me. So, but it is pretty much just like it was in those old days of SGN. We represent some of the same companies that we pioneered back in the 80s and 90s and 2000. And so now this company is a national, what SGN could have been and never came to be a national entity. And it just, but now I'm working with this company and it's sort of a semi-retired position. It's I have a wonderful boss who lives in Boulder, and we have a mutual respect for each other. And I'm one of the older people in the company. And
not a dharmic company, just to be clarifying.
Oh, not at all. No.
Okay.
No, my wife and I are the only two Sikhs who work for the company.
Okay, I was just clarifying.
No, yeah, sure.
So, you speak about, being the pioneer of things from the early, and I'm wondering if you can give us some perspective on what are the sales you brought it from when you started these early pioneering, get health food into the markets, being a health food distributor, salesman, to then what were the end result numbers financially that the companies ended up at. If can you give
I
us
still-
that, Lens?
Sure. I still remember the numbers. Yogi Tea was about averaging $50 a month commission when I first started in 86. Golden Temple was about $600 commission, existing sales. Sunshine Soothing Touch was about $2,500. They were the big company.
Soothing touch, what, the sunshine oils?
Sunshine, yeah, because they had sales in the region and it was established. So I figured I could do this because I had like $3,100 existing commission. I could grow it from there. The distributors, the word of mouth got out there. So we ended up getting a lot more companies. So all those companies started to add up. And in the beginning, like I said, it was all based on commission, and part of that went to KIIT, to YB's thing. And we
30% of everybody's
percent of our commissions
went right to
didn't
KIIT.
go to us. We got what was left. And so I can only use it as a reference point. Yogi Tea, when I left the company, was probably paying, combined with Golden Temple, was probably paying about $15,000 commissions a month. So from where it was, remember $600 for Golden Temple, $50 for Yogi Tea, is now, and the one that was driving those sales was Yogi Tea, ironically. Sunshine was gone. Soothing Touch was no longer existing as far as the industry goes. It was taken over by another competitor, or Acacia. You used to see Sunshine everywhere, Soothing Touch everywhere. It wasn't just a health food thing, it was in everybody, but no longer. So Golden Temple became the #1 granola on the East Coast. I mean, it was also strong in California, but in Oregon and the West Coast, but we became their top region.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
You say we a lot, and I appreciate that in the collective energy of community consciousness, but I also just want to put the lens back onto you, that you were a top salesman. You pioneered bringing brands into the health food industry that didn't have distribution, and they ended up on the map. The efforts and the relationships that you created over these years is what really brought a lot of this forward. Is that not correct?
I think that's true. Also, my wife too. She was, I mean, we were a dynamic duo. We were really, people in the industry loved my wife. You know, they loved her energy, and they loved that she was the person who really made me look good, because if I put an order out, I'd call her from Nashville. Here's an order for a store. She'd put it in. And so everything was followed through. There was no like, what happened to that order I gave you? It was always done. My wife was when we left Atlanta and went to Boston in 96, they had a going away party that was organized by the distributor, and all the brokers in the region that were competitors and key retailers came, and they had a vegetarian banquet. They picked us up in a what they called a limousine. I was roasted and she was toasted. And we still have that going away thing. So it was really so when I say we, really my wife and I, we did it together, but also people who came along afterwards, we also were part of a mission. Right. Everybody had the focus. We were able to convince people, this is us. Even though you weren't telling people like, I only make this money, you were just doing what you did. It would all come out eventually, because eventually, you know, patience pays, you know, it was going to happen. Well, it didn't happen, of course, the way you pushed it was going to happen, or you expected it to happen. But you know, working after I left all that, and then YB passed, and things, but I didn't think about all that after a while. It wasn't present with me. It was more like, just be you, do what you do. I really got into the history thing, and I was really doing a lot of research and meeting a lot of incredible people in the so that was my passion. It took me over here. And if I was asked to give a lecture on Sikhi, because I stood out, and people would say, could you come to my school? Could you come to my private academy? Could you come to my college? Could you come here? And then also with with TSA, I was highly visible there because I'm the first. And then they brought in a few other, you know, who were from Indian lineage. They came in various airports in the country. But I was very highly visible. And so the way I looked at things, Nishan, is that I wasn't representing me. I was representing the Sikh path.
Absolutely.
And wherever I went, people had to, that was the touchstone. They were Sikh, maybe they would meet another Sikh somewhere along the line who was maybe had darker skin than me, you know, because there were more of them than there are of me. But it was like they were looking, whatever you did, you didn't represent just you. You were part of 30 million people, and of which maybe 750,000 were living in the US and Canada, you know, another 750,000. So you were looking at this as like, I am I have to be always the best at what I do. I have to be what I say I'm going to do, and I have to keep my word. And so I can never look back with regret. I was able to live my life. You know?
What I'm trying to feel into is, when is it? It sounds like you walked away, you wanted to do that just to kind of keep it clean, you know, and you moved on and you started doing other jobs. And when was it that you started to really reflect on that this is financial predatory abuse?
Well, years after we left.
Okay.
As I was getting older, I left when I was 52. And when I got into between then and the 60s, and I got in my 60s, I started, every once in a while I'd get like really annoyed, and I'd say to my wife and other people who would listen to me, I'd say like, why did I not take a severance pay? Why did I let them do this? And why did, I kept asking those questions over and over again. But it is what it is. What would happen is we always would be all right. Somehow we would make it. It wasn't, but there was never you always thought like, what if we had that money put away for retirement? What if we had, we lived in an ashram? Just toss it up for that experience. You live with an intentional community, and you just did seva and but it's hard to rationalize. Then you find out that he was living off of us. That's how I see it now. And I look back and I see like those who are now, defending this and supporting this and ignoring the challenge, they're ignoring people that are telling their story, which is really what I'll concur with Tej saying. I'm really glad that you're doing what you're doing, because if you give people the chance to tell their collective stories, you're going to have a whole, like you said, a tapestry of stories. And I'm not out to badmouth other folks that I don't agree with. Everybody's going to come to their own realizations, maybe. But I do know that I have to be true to myself. And I'm very grateful to God and Guru that my daughters and my son-in-laws, our daughters and son-in-laws and our grandchildren are amazing, are just amazing. And, I've heard the stories. I heard it when you did those interviews. My kids didn't. I actually have been told by my daughters, we are grateful that we got that experience, that we got to go to school in Missouri. They made the best of it. So did my son-in-laws. They have other issues, that happened, but it had nothing to do with being abandoned or pushed away or whatever. They have other issues that they dealt with, but so I'm very grateful. I mean, somehow, by God's grace, we turned out. We're healthy. We're happy. Yeah. And we're still trying to be holy, but
so if I hear you correctly, this piercing into your awareness of like, wow, he was living off of us all these years. That really happened in March 2020, around that time when these stories like that really cracked it open for you to be
that crystallized. Yeah, that crystallized a lot of stuff, and it has sense. And since you hear other people tell their stories, you start to realize like, wow, this second generation, they really, no wonder they went through. You're one of them. No wonder people went through. They had all these things that just like, what's going on? This is not right.
Didn't add up.
When you're a young person, and you have ideals, you look at your parents. Are they your role models? You look at your, all this stuff. And if you're calling yourself, you're doing so, but it's not jiving. It's not all matching up. And then you hear about this other stuff that's so intense. I mean, I remember, Tej Singh saying what cracked it open for him. Well, I think just that was part of it, but that wasn't all of it, but it was enough to get me to really, whoa.
You mean the sexual abuse of the women?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I know some of the people, but I don't.
Young women of our daughters.
I find out that that's not. But there's so much more here, because that story that Tej talked about, buying that house in Toronto, that beautiful home, and then him putting $7,500 and then cashing it out 2 months after he left in '88, if I remember correctly, and he made a $500,000 profit. If things were transactional, everything was transactional, why were you kept in the business when you wanted to leave back in '93? Because you were bringing in something to this situation.
Right.
And when the thing wasn't going to work anymore, they could cut you loose because they'll go on to other things, I mean, they didn't need Golden Temple and Yogi Tea anymore because, first of all, after he passed, they sold Golden Temple, those who were in charge. And Yogi Tea got sort of stopped in its track, and now it's the big company, right? It's international. you know, and so a lot of these things were just starting to come into play. I don't have all the answers to it, but I realize the story of our life. I feel that we were very fortunate that we did what we did, and we enjoyed what we enjoyed, and we did accomplish the mission, which was to spread, you know, honesty and integrity and goodwill and trust to everyone we interacted with. That was really the mission for us. And even though he might have said that, he didn't live up to his own teaching, whether it was with women or the children or the youth or anybody else. I mean, I told you in my thing that, you know, I saw the way people of color were treated in this country, in this organization. I saw the way some of my friends were treated who were African American. I saw that in the 80s. I was like, this is, I mean, I saw it. It was right in front of me. People were using the N-word. They were, you know, treating people less than just because of the color of their skin. And then I saw the homosexuality, and that was being marginalized too, because, you know, these people are this or that. And I was like, what is this? I mean, there's nothing that we're taught. Forget Yogi Bhajan. There's nothing that Guru Nanak taught, or any of the 10 gurus taught, or any of the saints that we call part of our scripture, the Siri Guru Nanak Inc. Where does it say that homosexuality is bad or evil, or that people of color are separate? It was all about inclusiveness. It was all about oneness. It was all about the human race, not one race and another race and another race.
Well, ideally, but not in practice.
It's getting that way, though. I think from talking to some people, like that, they're young people, the younger groups are starting to make Sikhi become much more, hold them accountable, not just in 3HO,
sure,
but also in the greater Sikhi community in Vancouver, Canada, or even in India. I'm seeing more and more women, you know, taking a stand saying, I am equal with you, you know, and playing harmonium and singing and doing Gurbani, and some of them wearing turbans, some of them, you know, it's not, but I just say that. It's not,
I'm just more trying to get the perspective of when these things were happening in our community along these decades, the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and,
the 2000s.
You know, Premka and Kate Felt's lawsuit and the Time magazine article, and, you know, directors, you know, big people leaving, whether it was, you know, Waheguru or Wahegurus, or, you know, just different people, like, as a devoted person growing the mission, you're articulating a personal mission that you lived up to, but the mission was like a painted picture that, you know, had a lot of people devoted to it, and obviously we're finding out a lot more. So
I don't think people really knew that SGN existed outside of Yogi Bhajan's entourage. I don't even think they knew. They just knew, oh, you work for Yogi Tea, or you work for Golden Temple. They didn't see us as, we were invisible to them. Even though we were doing these things, they didn't see us. When they had the court case here back in the 2000s, and I was living in Portland, I went to the hearings at the court, and this is about who was going to win and who was going to take ownership of these companies. One of the women, I won't name who it is, but from LA, said, SatHanuman, didn't you work for CBB? I said, well, I work for, yeah, in SGN. Well, you have a story to tell. I said, well, yeah. And she goes up to somebody who was there, one of those people. SatHanuman needs to go on the stand. He needs to tell a story about SGN. And you go, no, we don't want any of that. We don't, you know, in other words, they kept it under the rug. They didn't want people to know that there was another thing that existed. I gave you a list of some of the companies that are under that KIIT umbrella. We were one of them. And remember, he started this company back at Winter Solstice, 1985. And I got hired in April of 86. And he says, we're going to grow this from just the health food industry to conventional everywhere. We're going to be in Safeway. And, you know, that was his goal. He one time asked me, what's your territory? He said that to me. He said, what's your territory? I said, my territory is from Bangor, Maine to Puerto Rico. He said, no, it's not. Your territory is from Bangor, Maine to Argentina. Mm. He was thinking like, I'm going to run the world. Mm. We're going to sell. Yogi Tea does that. I mean, he took that. He had that, but it was all about his thing. He was going to take it to the level that satisfied his needs. The rest of us were just, you know, like he offered Pavan back in 1993 or 96. I'm sorry. I'll pay $1,000 a month. What is going on here? You've got, you should be giving people a fair wage, a good wage, a ability to grow. And if they're producing and they're making, like in any other company, you come up for a review, you get a raise.
Get a raise, standard.
We didn't get, you know how many reviews I had in 16 years?
Mm-mm.
One. Never had a review, because every time it was a more formality. They never took that. And, you know, they might've done it with people who they hired that weren't part of the community. They hired outside, you know, because we had to have more people selling. It was, the demand was there. Oh, you want to get back to this other thing. All right, give you an example, Cliff Bar. We got hired in 1996 by Cliff Bar. They had 4 bars. They're in Berkeley, California. The existing commission on the East Coast was $5,000 commission. When my wife and I left in 2002, the existing commission was between $75,000 to $100,000 a month.
What?
Commission. Yeah. So if you got all your eggs in that basket, and you're hiring people and you're not paying, you know, the people who pioneered things and giving them, you got $100,000 or 75, let's say it was 75,000 coming in for just that company. And we got 40 companies we represent, big companies. Annie's Homegrown Pasta, Kettle Chips, Organic Valley Family Farms. It's 2,000 family farms across the country. We helped them when they were only 100 farms. Now they're 2,000. So they were growing, and we were being paid like dirt wages. And he was, so if you're bringing in on a monthly basis, 400,000, well, let's say 200,000 plus in commissions, and it all goes to KIIT. And then they pay you, you know, that first, between 86 and like 90, mid 90s, we had no insurance. We had no retirement. We had nothing. We just got what we got. But then they realized, oh, well, we got to treat them like we treat our employees at Golden Temple and Yogi Tea. So they gave us a retirement, a 401k. They had a health insurance plan we had that, but it was enough. And you had to do that because you can't attract people into a business if you're not taking care of them.
But also
right?
because there's employment laws, right?
Yeah, that's right. They were legitimately a business that had to go by the law, right?
Right, by a real law.
By real laws, yeah.
Corporation, right.
So anyway, that's really comes down to is he was really doing what he did, and you hear about the stories now of all those things that we are shocked with. We heard about what you alluded to. His lifestyle was his lifestyle. On the front end, he was the Siri Singh son. He was Yogi Ji. He was this respected Sikh world teacher who met with popes and generals and politicians and had the trust built all over the world with all this stuff. But what we found out was in the back room, he was who was paying for him to live and go to these places, to fly here and fly there? Who was paying that? It wasn't just
lavishly in Beverly Hills for lunch daily.
Exactly. Or goes to buy watches at, you know, nice watches and gold watches and you know, all of that stuff. And the staff, they lived in luxury. They all had, you know, they might've been used Mercedes, but they had good cars. And somebody would ask him like, sir, why do all the staff have Mercedes? He goes, because they're a safe car. If they get an accident, they'll be okay. You know, he had a rational reasons for everything. And but his legacy, he always said to these people, I went to 2 of the 3 men's courses. It was only supposed to be 1. I went to the first one. It was in Boston. I didn't go to the one in LA, but I did go to the one that was in Espanol. There was 3. All the things that he said, you know, you either leave a lineage or you leave a legacy. A lineage or a legacy. And so we're thinking his legacy is, you know, this humble yogi who on the outside looked like he was a very successful businessman, but on the real inside, kacheras, simple turban, humble man, sweet yogi, da-da-da-da. I don't have that view of him anymore. And I have to say that if we all went through what we went through, everybody, but I came out of it thinking like, now I see that he was using everybody. He was a master at one thing that I will say to this day. Yogi Harbhajan Singh was a master at manipulating, keeping circles within circles within circles within circles within circles, so that this guy over here didn't know what this guy's doing, and da 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 da. He was really good at that. And he had that energy that he could that thing that we look back now and say, who would even listen to that? My grandmother, when she first saw him, she went to a lecture with my mother. My mother thought, oh, he's pretty neat. And my grandmother, her mother said, no, he's not. He's a con man. She was on to him, and she was in her 80s, and I was like in my 20s, and I'm like, Grandma, come on. So you learn, you learn it's what karma is. You have to go through life and you learn your lessons, and hopefully you do learn them, and you come out the other side. But I'm very grateful. I'm grateful that we could have this chat. I hope I didn't overdo it, but
you haven't at all. I just want to say just how grateful I am for you to share this lens. I think it's a very important lens for many reasons, but number one, just to really bring the reverence of Sikhi and kind of the thread from the beginning to the end that has kind of been a continuum of your life, but more to really put a shine on the financial abuse and predatory behavior that is a common theme that we're noticing. And like what you're saying, SGN's under the radar, all these other things are happening, nobody knows, and I remember being young and my older brothers worked for different companies, or, their friends, and, Rama or Prab or whoever the people working for Golden Temple or KIIT. And all I remember hearing the older kids talk about was, and they were adults, young adults, was just terrible wages, terrible business practices, being treated like crap. Like the last place you'd want to work for is a dharmic company. And I'm young, so these things were permeating, and yet devotion kept people so blinded.
In one day, I had 5 people in LA that were going to be my boss. They were going to run the whole company. They let go of the original guy, and then it was this guy or that guy, or Ron Beer Singh, his eldest son. These people are going to be in charge. And I went, who's in charge? It's like he kept moving them around. Oh, that's not going to work. And this is not going to work. And this turns out that maybe that's what a sociopath is like. It just kept trying to plug holes and do this. And I'm like, they didn't want me to do anything above a certain level, because I was on, they knew that I would stand up for something and I would challenge them.
If it was out of place, if it was out of place, it was wrong, you would have put the cog in that wheel, because they knew you were building healthy relationships that were, you were like the cash cow or the golden goose.
Well, I would say, I wasn't the only one, though. I mean, like I said, my wife Amrit and I were a team, and we were. Now, remember, we left in the spring of 2002. She went under the wire, and then I left in July. So it was already summertime when I left. 1 year later, not even a year later, 8-9 months later, my wife called me and said, SGN has just folded. Folded. So from 1986 to 1993, CBB, from 93 to 2003, SGN. Why did they fold? Because their biggest egg, Cliff Bar, let them go after 7 years. We had companies 7 years, 5 years, 12 years, 15 years. We didn't lose companies. We had such a good, people stayed with us. But when they lost that big fish, they could not afford to stay in business. And they lost us. So when we kind of realized we had a big play, because if you take out that trust factor, you can only do smoke and mirrors for so long.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, and I've seen other companies do that too. People buy companies and they start changing the ingredients, and they start marketing like, oh yeah, it's that company that everybody wants, right? And then you start realizing it ain't the same anymore. And that's what was happening to this. It went under because of the way it was managed. And nobody wanted to run this company, because he was running it for himself. But remember, in 2004, he's gone. So nobody's going to want to run this. By 2003, he was going down, and they were like, we don't want SGN. We don't even want Sunshine. Get rid of that. We'll take Golden Temple Yogi Tea because that's ours. And that's when they started doing this stuff of trying to, how are we going to keep this money? And they started paying themselves like huge salaries. I'm talking about the people that were running things in the back, And
that the lawsuits happened when they took everything and all that. So you're talking about pre-lawsuit, right? So
you see all that happening, and you go like, well, I feel grateful that we got through this. It's been a long journey, but it was just like that one time that I prayed. I the prayers were, I was covered. Everything got covered. I knew many years ago, back when I was just in my 20s, that I never really crystallized it, but I heard it, that if we were chanting to Guru Ram Das, we really were chanting to Yogi Bhajan. That word, Guru Ram Das, became more like what we thought we were relating to. Remember, he was always saying, I'm not the guru, I'm the teacher.
So say that again. You're saying, at what point did you realize that when we were chanting, when he was telling you to chant to Ram Das?
That first thing I told you about back in 1972, when I went to that 3-day weekend intensive at the ashram in Orlando, well, we were chanting to Guru Ram Das, and the person leading the chant and his guitar turned to me and he said, everybody here thinks we're chanting to this Guru Ram Das, but I think we're really praying to Yogi Bhajan. In other words, he is the guru. And it's just a whole, I put that in the back of my mind because as I've spoken to other people who have come to this realization, who thought we were in a cult? Who thought that?
Right.
The people that left probably, like Premka and people like that. But the rest of us who kept going, we weren't thinking that way. I wasn't thinking that way prior to March of 2020. I was thinking like legacy of this great teacher. I mean, he has a highway in New Mexico named after him. 100% of Congress honored him along with Mother Teresa and Dr. Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela. He's like this great yogi.
Yeah.
Right? And I had to convince Indian Sikhs, Punjabis, he's not what you think he is. And you know what? I had to eat those words.
He was worse. He was worse.
Yeah, they knew, especially the women. They knew. And but it's, like anything else, Guru Nishan, I've come to the realization that there's karma. And by God's grace, this thing called the Sikh path is what I was anchored in. So when all this thing fell apart, it didn't fall apart. That didn't fall apart. Just like you said, when you interviewed Diana, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
With her first trip that she went to Harimandir Sahib, she did not want to leave.
Yeah.
That first trip that I went to Harimandir Sahib, when I left after being there a week the first time, I wept. I was home. I didn't want to leave. And so, I'm not a perfect Sikh. I'm just a person who this is where I relate. This is how I relate. I relate to the Shabad Guru. I relate to the vibration. I relate to the seva. I relate to the pure teachings. And I will confront anybody born a Sikh, whether they be from the West or India or other parts of the world. If we aren't living it, I've walked up to them and said, what are you doing? I've asked people, you know how people in the Sikh thing, they have a Gurdwara and then they have infighting and then they start another Gurdwara, they break away. Sure. And I'm like, especially after 9/11, do you realize that it isn't just you? You're not in India anymore. You can't play this game. You're in the United States. People are looking at you, and the only way you're going to overcome that fear they have of this, who they think you are, is to show them. And I've been really fortunate to connect with good, true Guru Sikhs that have stood up for what's right and have that reputation. They have the legacy.
Yes.
They have the legacy. And to me, that's the blessing. My family is God, we're doing fine. We're able to get through, and
wow.
Hopefully I'll make it to the final breath and it'll be still fine. But anyway,
you're amazing. Your outlook's amazing, your work ethic's amazing, and the service that you've delivered to other people along the way on your whole path has just been really beautiful to hear. I also want to point out that the outlook of we just do the best we can, we look at the best, we look for the best options within a shithole, for lack of a better word. And I say that because I feel like collectively in our consciousness, that was very much a part of the training that I remember growing up with is you take it personally as your soul work, this is just a part of the lesson. I know I can do it. And for me, the persona, my success as a saleswoman, my persona as very, very positive and bright and shining. At one point, I just realized, wow, I'm overextended in that. Like, this is wonderful qualities, but I've also not developed something else.
Which is probably why somebody probably got you into multi-level marketing, because they saw in you all of this energy that you would be great for this.
Well, it's not only that, SatHanuman, what's interesting for me is that my awakening that I was repeating my patterns of abuse growing up, which, I didn't call abuse. I thought my growing up was wonderful, for in all intents and purposes. It was that experience in that industry that was like, oh my God, I'm repeating a cult. This reminds me of my growing up. And it was the first parallel, which was for me back in 2012. And it took many years, but through 2013, 14, 15, 16, I'm chipping away at a lot of the indoctrination that I didn't even really, of course, you knew basic indoctrination, but I didn't know the big level stuff, the predatory financial abuse or the business corruption or the manipulating of people to each other or the sexual predation, and how built into the hierarchy of the teachings and the circles and the leadership, how much it's infused in the whole running of things. And there might be people like you or a person like me that's living up to their integrity and being extra positive and doing all those things, but within the enmeshment of our family/community, there's a lot of predatory behavior that's continually repeated because it was implemented by him.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. We are, you may have heard of this concept before, but that we pick our parents. People say, I don't know what gender that person's going to be. We pick our parents. The soul chooses its mother when it comes into the world. I still feel that's true. I feel like, and then you have a certain karma. You come into the world and you have to deal with it. I think for my family, like let's say my wife and I are now, we look at we come from our families and we go, wow, our fathers did the best they could. And they weren't always, you grow up, you have expectations of your family, or your parents, but father did the best he could. Mother did the best she could. We have to love them for that because that got us to us. Sure. And now we have to do the same thing for the next generation after us, and then the next after that. And that's what being a grandparent is. This is what this is about. It's about taking what you came in with and trying to make it even better. And so whatever I went through that was challenging, I probably didn't think it was that way. Like, we didn't think we were in a cult. We weren't thinking like, oh, I'm in a cult because we saw the other guys as the cult, the Hare Krishnas and the Rajneesh and all that stuff. We said, God, those guys are cult. Why weren't we a cult? Because our teacher was connecting with people like, all those people.
But the biggest one, I think, is because he linked it into the Sikhi religion,
Exactly. But that's what gave him legitimacy.
Yeah, there was legitimacy there.
Yeah, and so that's, but...
Which is actually really common in high-demand groups, like in the studies of cults and high-demand groups. It's actually quite common to link in ideology that has a large historical lineage, so to speak.
Yeah, so I a lot of people that I met along the way were involved in these other groups, but I always thought I wasn't like that. We had this because I related to the Sikh path. Yeah. And I tell you a funny story. I was working in a Whole Foods store one day. This is about 10 years ago. And a man walks by. He's Punjabi, but he's not wearing any turban or anything, clean shaven. Walks by and he goes, oh, you are a Yogi Bhajan follower. You follow Yogi Bhajan. I looked at him. I said, this is 10 years ago. I said, I'm not a follower of Yogi Bhajan. I'm a Sikh of the Guru. He goes, oh, I know him. We grew up together. I said, good for you. This is 10 years ago. This isn't last, fall or last spring. This is like, I know. And I've talked to my daughters about the same thing because they get challenged too. And they always relate to the Shabad Guru. They relate to the Guru, and it's not everybody's, this is not everybody's path. I've learned over the years, this is not everybody's path.
So I just want clarity there because I do appreciate and I love what you're sharing here, that you related directly to the Shabad Guru. And yet your devotion, unrelenting devotion to Yogi Bhajan and the mission he painted and all of that remained intact. So how is that reconciled?
Well, like I said, when the Pandora's box opened 10 months ago, in my own personal life with my family, my wife was way ahead of me. She already suspected all this stuff. She saw it. Maybe it's the woman's perception, her intuition, but I was blinded by my devotion, and I felt it was all. I never saw him as my guru, because I was able to separate the two. You know, he's the teacher. Maybe he interprets things that other people don't understand that are also Sikhs, you know, and then he had all this yogic stuff that he would talk about. And by the way, I was never a great yogi. I enjoyed teaching when I was younger, but I wasn't a disciplined person when it came to doing asanas and pranayamas. And, you know,
Sure.
there. So, but this path of going in and bowing my head before something beyond a personality and listening to the vibration, whether I was at Anandpur Sahib or at a Gurdwara here, it all felt like I was home. It felt the way it was supposed to feel. And so, yeah,
I've heard this lens a little in the sense that Sikhi was more of like the connection, less of the yoga, and I think that's an important distinction because some people are the opposite. And
yeah.
But and all is great in terms of whatever.
Yeah, anybody who thinks that they're totally into the yoga, they just want that, great, fantastic.
But my question for you though is, 10 years ago, you're replying to this Punjabi saying, no, I bow to the Shabad Guru, right? My guru is not Yogi Bhajan. And yet there was a level of devotion. So what was your relationship to him? And then the guru is the higher part of that. You had that right relationship, it sounds, but you still had a direct relationship. Would you do anything he said regularly? I mean, is that a common thing at that time throughout your life?
He told us to stay with the company when we were about to resign and leave. And there was along the way, you know, he knew exactly how to push that button. He could, because he knew the devotion was there, you know? And so we don't know that then, but we know that looking back. So it really happens when I hear the stories that I was shocked to hear. And so when that stops, it stops you in your track and you start to reflect on that, how did that happen? And then you're feeling guilt. You're feeling, you know, the duality is like, why did I not know that? You know, that's a common thread I'm sure you've heard too, is we just didn't know. Why? Because I wasn't living in LA. I wasn't living in Espanola. I wasn't living in Herndon, Virginia a lot. I was living in an ashram that had its own identity with its own cozy culture. The Millis ashram still is there. The same people that I grew up with 50 years ago are still, some of them are still there, and they're growing older, you know, in their 70s, late 60s. And they're still doing wonderful things and keeping up, and they've raised families. So you don't think about all that stuff going on in his life. You only think about, so when he showed up, it was your teacher. He showed up. If you touched his feet, that was the tradition. You touched his feet. I never got down and kissed his feet, but you touched his feet. That was the tradition of a teacher and a student. You didn't think
and when
about
people left, you just kind of believed the narrative that was being told, and you just kind of kept it moving.
Some of you think like, okay, Wahguru Singh, he couldn't handle it, or so-and-so left, he couldn't let Singh. But when Kurban left, I knew back in 1995, 96, Kurban could handle it. He was a strong, dynamic person. But what he couldn't handle is that he was being slapped in the face by his teacher. And even though it opened up an opportunity, if he had taken that job in 96, I wouldn't have moved from Atlanta up to Boston. So that opening gave me a chance to go home again.
Yeah,
New England's my heart is there. So, but I still saw other people being shut down and being pushed to the side. And yet I kept, I didn't know all the sexual stuff. We all heard about it. There's rumors, there's this, and you go like, yeah, everybody has that. It happens to everybody. You go back and look at Swami Satchidananda or other people say, oh, there was accusations here and there. But I didn't put it all together until like almost a year ago. And when that happened, it started to, the veil came down. And then I started to go, wow. And then I started to have understanding and compassion. I went on those calls and I listened to your generation, and I listened to the stories that they were telling. Some of these people I knew them when they were just kids, when they were in Masudi. I saw them, grow up. I saw my own kids and my own son-in-laws who were incredible, wonderful human beings. And I saw that happening and I went, why? And you just kept asking yourself, why didn't I see it? Why was I so blind?
Mm.
And then at the same time you go like, I can't be angry. And I've gone through anger, but I'm saying you can't go out and just start saying, you people are, wake up. I mean, you want to say it, but you can't. Everybody's on their own timetable to go through it. And maybe they will and maybe they won't, but it's not like, look at all the people that left that I knew back in the 70s and 80s, and they left, and they were always trying to get us to wake up. When are you going to wake up? This is not what you think it is. And now I understand. I understand what Vikram was saying. I understand what Peter was saying. I understand, but I didn't know. And now I listen to Tej tell his story and I go, he's found his path and he realizes, he did the best he could. He had integrity.
Yeah.
Rose had integrity. She still has integrity.
Yeah.
You say her name is Bhagwan Kaur, and I knew her son before he passed. I knew that they grew up together. My kids grew up with these guys. Yeah. When I hear her tell her story, I'm like, I told a friend of mine here in Portland, who's a dear friend, and I said, remember Bhagwan Kaur? He goes, of course I know her. He said, she's incredible, because they knew she loved to chant. She got a guitar and chant, and she was a positive. That's what kept everything going. Yeah. Is that when you met in New Mexico at whatever, it's the summer solstice sadhana, or you met in Florida at the winter solstice sadhana, or you went to a lecture or a course, the same people start to show up. Not only the wealthy, successful people who had the money to travel anywhere, go to India, go to wherever he went, but you had your regular people, us, the regular people. And you had that. And so those were the authentic people who kept me like keeping up, because I was surrounded by folks that I trusted, that were really had the same mission, the real mission. And so I think that's probably why it helped me. And it's good to know now that some of those people are still carrying on and still keeping up. And I could call them up when I get off this with you, and I could say, oh, so-and-so, and they're like, yeah, somehow I know. And we went through the same stuff. And some of us, when we woke up, we went, I've talked to them, and they go like, why didn't I know? The same thing. I asked my daughter, I said, did you ever think you were in a cult? And she said, Papaji, did you? No. You don't know. Yeah. You don't know what it's always easy to see somebody else's stuff. And you don't see your own stuff, and you don't see what you're in. Yeah, that's all. It feels good. It's like a nice therapy to go through the process of just going through the stories and realizing how fortunate you are that you're still okay.
Still here. Yeah. Still covered.
Yeah. And by the way, red is my favorite color. So I have every color you can imagine in turbans. I have a lot of white ones, but I don't wear them as much anymore. When I was at TSA, I could only wear a black turban, a navy blue turban. As the uniforms changed, I could only wear those two colors. When it was the other color, I could wear this maroon or a reddish color, and I could wear white, and I could wear blue. And then, so I set the standard for TSA, because they never had a Sikh before. So that, what color? I couldn't walk in with a saffron turban, an orange turban, and say, well, that's the color I'm wearing today, because it wasn't uniform, see? Sure. So I had to figure it out. And it was probably my military bearing and military training that realized, I have to really show them the way and make them believe it was them that was doing it. They're in charge. They're
the authority. They're
the authority, But it was all good. Everything worked out, and it still is working out. And by God's grace, Waheguru,
It will continue.
It will continue.
Did you wear white most of the time, and then only start bringing in color later, or were you always a wild turban rebel?
No. I started wearing colors probably early on. Like even if I went to summer solstice, I would wear a blue turban. We all had those shorter turbans. We called them house turbans. They were saffron.
Those, orange.
But I decided I would wear any color I want, no matter what. I could wear black. I don't have a lot of black clothing. I don't. But if anybody wore black, I wouldn't say, what are you wearing black for? All that stuff about expanding the aura and extending the nerve, all that stuff. It had its place in its day, but it wasn't something I could be attached to. If I saw somebody without a turban and they said I'm a Sikh, I'd say, good.
Bless you.
Bless you. I mean, I don't care. It isn't the form. The form is an extension of you.
Yes.
It's inside. And if it allows you to be that, I mean, remember, I traveled so much. I was in the South from 1986 to 1996. And for 10 years, and no one ever said like, who the what are you? Or get out of here. I don't want your kind around. That happened after 9/11. And it happened when I came out to Oregon, ironically. You think of Oregon as the tree hugger state, but you run into people that are like doing stuff like, with their middle finger and stuff. And I'm like, what is going on?
Right. Wow.
But it is an interesting experience. But colors to me were like, I wanted to wear what I wanted to wear as far as the colors go. And I have the bana, but my bana, I actually have maroon bana. I have blue bana. I have, colors that people, I remember when I wore a different color one than white one time, Yogi Bhajan looked at me, I was in Espanola, and he looked at me like strange, like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I just looked at him back and said, I look good. I feel good. He couldn't say anything to me because I was satisfying other things, I guess.
You were the golden goose on those elements.
The golden goose, and the king had his, the Midas touch. So.
The Midas. What I was going to say is, I feel like men started wearing had colored turbans and had a little more leeway for many, many years. That didn't even come, even like a more informal turban for women didn't even show up until many years later, much less color.
Yeah, and now it's and people start wearing earrings that they didn't wear before.
It's all over.
All you could wear. If you're gonna wear earrings, wear diamonds or pearls, but don't wear the other stuff. I understand all of those things change, and we just start to realize I'm me. I'm going to be who I am. When back to the original Hanuman.
Yeah. It
was in 1999 in Anandpur Sahib when Sarab Singh came running up to me with Pavan. We were all there at the 300th anniversary. And he said, Papaji, look at this. He had the list of all the Jethadars going back to Baba Deep Singh, all the way up. And the seventh Jethadar of the Buddha Dal Nahangs that was in charge of the Akal Tucket back hundreds of years ago was Baba Hanuman Singh. Look, there was a Jethadar named Baba Hanuman Singh. And I started to realize what Hanuman was not the monkey god, that's mythology, that really Hanuman meant something even more, something I've never yet been able to comprehend. It literally means the one who conquers the mind. That's literally what it means. Hanan Man. Man means mind, and Hanan means to conquer or annihilate. They always say, oh, he's the servant of God. He's the servant of God. I'm like, well, if you conquer the mind, your heart is open to everyone. There's no duality, right? I'm not there yet. I may never get there. Right? Because everything's a challenge. The mind is the challenge. So, but I'm grateful I have that name. I've started to drop the Sat, even though it's my legal name, and just go by Hanuman. Because I wanted people to go back to that roots without his branding, so to speak, that he didn't name me Hanuman. He named me Sat Hanuman. So I said, you know what? I'm Hanuman, and I'm a Singh, and that's who I am. I do have a regret. My grandmother was not happy when I did this. I maybe shouldn't have changed my last name to Khalsa. Because it was the thing we did back then, but I really wish some people have their birth name / Khalsa or whatever. I wish I had done, but now that I'm, I talked to my wife about, we're gonna have to change all of these things and do all these things. I'm like, unless I win the lottery, I'm not doing all that stuff. But it is what it is. And
because you had quite a family name. You were a third.
I was, and if you go on my Facebook page, you'll see that my name is listed as SatHanuman Singh. My birth name, Erickson Khalsa, so that it's there. And I think I wanted to honor my family, and I should have thought of that when I was younger. And God bless my mother. It bothered her, but she still loved me unconditionally. So she still hung in there. And it's just how fortunate are we that we could have that, I'm a historian. That's how I get through things. I go back and look at things and how things happened.
And how they repeat, right? How they repeat, how if we don't learn it, how if we don't extract lessons and then re-embody it back into the version of me that I'm becoming, then we just repeat the same thing without
The lesson we have to learn is each of us has to learn has to learn our own lesson. Because you can say, unless we, let's say collectively, learn from those things, we're going to repeat them. We never do. All you do is look at this country and see all of the things that has the two sins that I call it of America: racism and, towards Native Americans and African Americans. We have never overcome that. It's still part of the virus that we have. I heard Tej say something like that. I'm not saying, but we are dealt with a deck of cards, and how do we play those cards? And I can't speak for the greater people, the United States, or even people in 3HO or whatever. I have to answer to what I have to do. And yeah.
Well, I just want to commend you and say I honor that you're choosing Hanuman, that you're just dropping the branding and really going back to the essence of your own path. And that just felt really good. I got tingles in my back body. So thank you for that.
Yeah, well, yeah. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
As we're wrapping up, is there anything lastly that you really want to make sure that you share?
What about that song that you were going to play?
We're going to get there. We're going to end the song. But just in general, like in closing, what last message do you want to share about your own experience? What you want listeners to know?
I think I suggest, or I make a recommendation now that I'm a senior, that you go within yourself and be true to yourself. Find your path and listen to that voice within yourself, whether it's the guru that you identify with or your soul that you identify with, but follow that and never give up, because eventually, if you keep going, if you keep focusing, if you meditate on a candle and you just don't blink your eyes and you just look at that flame, this is one technique of learning how to meditate. What you will end up seeing is, as you look at that white flame and you close your eyes, let's say you do it for 3 minutes. It's an experiment. Try it. When you close your eyes, in the middle of your forehead, you will see a blue light. Why? Because the center of that white flame is blue gas. It's blue. You're going to see that blue light right here. And I think you have to concentrate. People have goals, right? Whether it's an athletic goal or a goal to raise a family or the goal to be the best at what they can be. Stay true to that. Don't let anybody deter you. Nobody. We're in a time now that you can't be an autocratic ruler anymore.
Yeah.
You have to trust that everybody has a path that they're on. And if you merge and you come together, wow. And you don't force people to be. If they want to cut their hair, that's fine, because it's not inside them to have it. If they want to wear a turban, fine. If they don't want to wear a turban, no, then it's okay. Everybody's going to have to deal with that. And ultimately, the truth is the highest calling, and I'll leave with this. And maybe there's a lot of duality about this particular, but remember, my influence of being into this path was this little guy brown guy with a dhoti on named Mohandas K. Gandhi. And, what did he say? If you saw the movie, I don't know if you ever saw the movie, it was the first time the Golden Temple was ever shown to the public all over the world was in that movie. And Ben Kingsley, part Indian himself, Englishman, he's made a movie about Sikhs after that. He made a movie called Learning to Drive, a really good story about the whole Sikh, really exposed people. But in the movie Gandhi, he says at the end of the movie, as his ashes are being strewn with rose petals on the Ganges, he said, "When I despair and I see that tyrants have that," I'm paraphrasing, that tyrants have that moment where they run things, they rule. Then I realize that in the end, truth always will prevail. You have to keep going. And maybe that Bij mantra of Satnam was the greatest gift that this yogi, this man, gave to us, because it has a lot of power. It originally comes from Guru Nanak, the Mool mantra. And so if you use that and that's what you do, you'll get there. And if you have another prayer or another mantra, whether it's Amen or Alleluia or Shalom or whatever, or Om Shanti, focus on that. Be true to your destiny, be true to your path.
Thank you, SatHanuman. Thank you so much for sharing yourself so cleanly. Do you want to tell us about your song?
Well, the song that I told you my wife Amrikar turned on to me many, many years ago, she clung to this song. It reminded her of something very dear to her, and it's called Caledonia. And it's by a folk singer from Scotland who wrote the song, and his name MacLean, Dougie MacLean. And that song resonates with me because for me, it's about returning to your soul, returning to your home. Caledonia means this place that is your origin. It could be your family, it could be your country, it could be your true self. But all along the path, you're going to meet people and you're going to lose friends and you're going to gain more friends. And that's what the song says. And I relate to that song. It's a heart-centered song.
Well, let's listen.
Genuinely homesick, and you might want to join in with the chorus of this and see how much noise you can make.
Waheguru. Thank you so much again for joining us, SatHanuman Singh Khalsa. This has been another episode of the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast, the untold stories of the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community. If you'd like to contribute to this podcast, you can make a one-time or monthly donation at gurunishan.com/uncomfortableconversations. And if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, please send me an email to gn@gurunishan.com. You can subscribe, follow, and support my provocative truth-telling work at gurunishan.com. As a side note, Guru Nishan does have a C, NISCHAN.com.
Guru's banner.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much.